Chapter 1082. Gina, this spatial ring is for you. You can return it to me the next time we meet. Elizabeth passed the spatial ring to Gina and taught her how to open it at the same time. Thank you, Gina said gratefully to Elizabeth as she put the ring on her finger carefully. Goodbye. Gina looked around at the people on the wooden boat. She waved her hand and jumped into the water, revealing her rainbow fishtail. She quickly dived into the depths of the sea and disappeared from everyone's sight. All right, we can start our vacation mode now. Meg smiled at everyone as he took out the sea fishing tools that he had prepared in advance from the box. These were all ready-made tools that he had bought from the system. Although there was no lack of experts on the boat who could catch fish out of thin air, the most enjoyable part of fishing was the process. He taught the ladies how to hook, how to throw the rod, and how to enjoy the process of fishing while basking in the warm winter sun. Aya, Anna, your fishing line is entangled with mine. Phyllis, can you move your fishing rod? I feel like our fishing lines are going to be entangled with each other. My fishing rod is going to be thrown out together. Meg didn't know whether to laugh or cry at the ladies' mishaps during their first time fishing. He could only act as a firefighter and be responsible for placing everyone's fishing rods in the right position so that they only had to wait for the fish to take the bait. Only then did he return to his seat and wait. Amy sat beside Meg with a little purple fishing rod in front of her. Ugly Duckling squatted beside her and stole a glance at her. Then, it reached out its hand carefully toward the prawn that was used as bait. Its sharp little claws were already exposed. Ugly Duckling, you're not allowed to eat the prawns. Otherwise, I'll use you as bait, Amy said seriously as she lowered her head. Meow. Ugly Duckling retracted its little claws and stroked the prawn's head gently before retracting them obediently. A smile appeared on Meg's lips. It would be such a waste if she didn't go into beast taming with her talent. Sea fishing was an art. Perhaps it was because of the previous shark. Meg and the others waited for an hour, but no fish took the bait. Meg looked around. Apart from Elizabeth, who was still staring intently at the fishing rod, everyone else was already leaning against the comfortable lounge chairs and falling asleep in the warm sunlight, including Ugly Duckling, who was hugging a shrimp. Should we go somewhere else? Meg raised his eyebrows and wondered if he should change the fishing spot. At this moment, his fishing rod suddenly bent downwards and the bell rang loudly. He took the bait. Almost at the same time, everyone on the boat opened their eyes and reached out to grab the fishing rods in front of them. It's with me. Meg held on tightly to the fishing rod that was already bent like a longbow. Judging from the strength of the fishing rod, this should be a big guy, bigger than any fish he had ever caught before. The wooden boat shook visibly. The fish began to circle around the wooden boat, messing up the fishing line. However, the girls didn't get angry because of this. Instead, they all gathered around the edge of the boat with great interest. This was the first fish that took the bait after more than an hour. They looked down at the water, wanting to know what kind of fish Meg had caught. This fish was quite strong, but Meg was very calm. One had to know that he had 7th tier strength now, and his strength wouldn't be reduced by standing on the boat. Furthermore, when he bought the fishing rod, the system had already promised that the quality of the fishing rod, hook, and line was guaranteed to be 5,000 kilograms. After letting the big guy swim for a while, Meg began to reel in the line slowly. Anyway, he didn't lack strength, and he didn't have to worry about whether the hook and line would break. Go, father, go. Amy and Anna clenched their little fists and cheered at the side with a look of admiration on their little faces. With the little lowly cheering him on, Meg was naturally even more motivated. When he was almost done reeling in the line, he grabbed the fishing rod with both hands and swung it up forcefully. A big fish with blue stripes was thrown out of the water and landed on the wooden boat with a splash. The whole wooden boat shook with it. This big fish was more than 2 meters long and weighed more than 100 kilograms. The blue-striped fish scales shone brightly under the sun, and there was a layer of faint golden light on the surface of its body. A mutated grouper species? Meg looked at that fish with surprise. It seemed to be a first-tier magic beast, but it seemed to have lost its dreams after coming ashore. It opened its mouth, but didn't even try to struggle. Wow! What a big fish! Amy exclaimed in surprise, and pounced on it directly. Meow. Ugly Duckling's eyes were green with envy. It also pounced on it, and pressed down on the big fish's tail. Right at this moment, a fierce look suddenly appeared in the big fish's eyes. It bent its body as if it wanted to slap Ugly Duckling away. Bam! Without waiting for it to move, an oar had already smacked its head, knocking it out of breath with a single blow. Everyone who was about to make a move looked at Yarbemia, who was holding the oar. Did I hit it a little too hard? Yarbemia put away the oar in her hand embarrassedly, and stuck out her tongue. It's my first time seeing such a big fish, so I was a little nervous. Well done, MIA. Leave the rest to me. Meg stepped forward with the cleaver, and began to kill the fish. Although he didn't know what kind of fish it was, from its appearance, it should be some kind of grouper. He had seen a 100-kilogram grouper before, but this was the first time he had caught one himself. Furthermore, it was a first-tier magic beast, so it was naturally more rare. He couldn't help but be curious about the quality of the meat of this big fish. Since there was fish, he naturally had to grill it. However, this fish was too big, so he could only take a section to grill it. Other than that, Meg took a piece of fresh fish meat, and cut it into 2 plates of sashimi. The fresh fish meat was pink in color, and there were beautiful white wavy patterns on it. When cut into long strips, it looked very tempting. It would take a while to grill the fish, so Meg called the ladies over to try the sashimi first. Amy looked at the sashimi with confusion, and asked, "Father, how can we eat the fish if it's not cooked?" Everyone also looked at Meg with confusion. They had never eaten raw food in the restaurant before. Every time, Meg would cook the ingredients into delicious dishes. This is a marine fish, so there are very few parasites on it. Therefore, it's fine to eat a moderate amount of sashimi. Meg used his chopsticks to pick up a piece of sashimi and put it on the plate. Then, he picked up some wasabi and put it on the fish. He folded the fish, covered the wasabi, and dipped it in soy sauce before putting it into his mouth. He chewed lightly, and the freshness of the fish, the aroma of the soy sauce, and the spiciness of the wasabi all bloomed in his mouth at the same time. His taste buds seemed to have bloomed as well. Chapter 1083. Under the deep sea, the light was getting dimmer and dimmer. A figure shot downwards like a sharp arrow. That dark water curtain had already appeared in Gina's vision. This was the first time she saw the water curtain that sealed Lantiste from the outside. It was like an inverted bowl that held Lantiste in place. So, Lantiste is so small, and the outside world is so big. Gina mumbled to herself. She used her hand to protect the piece of paper that was hidden in front of her chest. Then, she held the trident and smashed it against the light curtain. The light screen trembled and collapsed like a balloon. In the end, it still broke open a hole. Gina went through, and turned back to look at the light curtain that had already recovered. Her face was filled with surprise. I did it. The cursed barrier that the merfolk of Lantiste had not been able to go through for so many years was easily penetrated by her. As expected, the light curtain lost its effect after she gained the ability to breathe. A few merfolk who were fishing nearby saw the light curtain ripple suddenly. Then, a figure came through the light curtain. One of them opened his mouth in shock, and hurriedly dodged. It's Princess Gina. Soon, someone recognized Gina and exclaimed, Princess Gina is back. She actually went through the cursed wall. Has she already found the Chosen One? The news that Gina went to find the Chosen One had already spread throughout Lantiste. Lantiste placed all their hopes on her. The merfolk looked at Gina, who came through the wall, and quickly thought of many possibilities. Their faces were filled with surprise. Yes, I'm back. Gina kept her trident, and transformed into a stream of light. She swam towards the capital, Evo City, directly below. Gina. In the palace, the high priest, who had his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes. Gina's image appeared on the crystal ball in front of him. Has she already found a way to go through the seal? The high priest's murky eyes lit up immediately. Even his hands were trembling uncontrollably. Princess Gina is back. The cheers quickly spread throughout the capital. The merfolk looked up at the stream of light that was rapidly approaching them, and shouted excitedly. The news of the Nether Shark's invasion had already spread throughout the capital. Pessimism and despair were spreading. Gina's sudden return was like a cardiac stimulant that made Evo City boil instantly. Gina is back. Lantiste is saved. In the palace, when the king heard the cheers coming from outside the palace, he immediately stood up and swam outside excitedly. Gina, my child, you are finally back. The queen was also delighted as she followed the king and swam out of the palace. The colorful flowing light slowly stopped on the altar. Gina retracted her fishtail and stood on the altar with her legs. She looked at her clansmen who had surrounded the altar with a smile. The mermaids looked at Gina in surprise. However, when their gazes fell on the strange clothes she was wearing, they all looked curious. Unlike their clothes that were made of seashells and seaweed, the clothes that the princess was wearing looked more classy and did not seem to be from Lantiste. A dim light flashed, and the high priest in a black robe appeared on the altar. High priest. Gina bowed respectfully. The merpeople around the altar also bowed respectfully. His Majesty the King, Her Majesty the Queen. Another loud shout rang out, and the crowd opened up a path. The king and queen quickly arrived at the altar. Father, mother. Gina bowed again, and all the merfolk followed suit. The high priest stared at Gina for a while before saying in a hoarse voice, Gina, have you seen the Chosen One? Have you learned the breathing technique on land? Everyone looked at Gina with a fervent gaze. This was extremely important to Lantiste. The fate of Lantiste could change completely because of this. Even the king and queen were looking forward to it. Gina nodded vigorously, and said, Yes, I have seen the Chosen One, Mr. Meg. He saved me and made the miracle medicine that gave me the ability to breathe on land. Also, I passed through the cursed barrier directly without any hindrance. The Chosen One, miracle medicine. There was an uproar among the merpeople, and their faces were filled with excitement. The king stepped forward and asked, Gina, have you brought back that miracle medicine? Where is the Chosen One now? The king took a step forward and asked Gina with an agitated expression. Yes, Mr. Meg gave me many miracle medicines, and the beautiful Miss Elizabeth lent me her spatial ring so that I could bring all the miracle medicines back. Gina nodded, and raised the spatial ring in her hand. She thought for a while, and with a wave of her finger, she pushed the seawater away and opened up a waterless space. Then, she activated the spatial ring and poured out all the mud casings. The mud casings with a golden glow were like some kind of mysterious eggshell, and the eyes of the merpeople lit up. Is this the miracle medicine that can remove the curse on my people? Could it be the eggshell of some mythical beast? The high priest walked forward and looked at the mud casings in the waterless space. His eyes were shining as if he was looking at the most precious treasure. In order to let the merpeople get rid of the curse, generations of priests had worked hard for thousands of years, but they all failed. And now, the antidote was right in front of them, and they could reach it. The world outside the barrier was no longer far away. The merpeople's eyes were also filled with respect and desire. This was the hope of Lantiste. Gina shook her head, and said, No, this was made by Mr. Meg. Although there is indeed a very delicious chicken in this eggshell, it shouldn't be some mythical beast because there are many people who eat one every day and abandon this eggshell. SSSS. A series of gasps could be heard, and the merpeople looked at Gina in disbelief. Even the high priest's expression froze. Are the people in the outside world already so extravagant? The king said with difficulty with a worried expression. Then, aren't their abilities already very terrifying? Gina thought for a while, and said, I saw 5 10th-tier powerhouses at Mr. Meg's place, and 2 of them came to the restaurant to eat every day. Among the waitresses at Mr. Meg's restaurant, there is an 8th-tier frost dragon, Miss Elizabeth, and a 7th-tier spatial magic caster, Miss Barbara. Mr. Meg's daughter, little Amy, is 4 years old this year, and she is already a 6th-tier magic caster. The high priest's face was filled with shock. There was dead silence around the altar instantly, and the merpeople's faces were filled with fear. A 4-year-old 6th-tier magic caster. After more than 1,000 years, has the outside world become so terrifying? The king's voice was trembling. Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1084. A merfolk's lifespan could reach up to 300 years. Gina was already a rare prodigy among the merfolk, but she had only just started cultivating when she was 4 years old. This difference made the king's heart turn cold. He had once thought of bringing Lantiste out of the sea and returning to the mainland so that Lantiste could have a foothold on the Norland continent again, and even join in the fight for the mainland. However, after hearing Gina's words, he had completely given up on this idea. Gina had only been out for a few days, and she had already met 5 10th-tier powerhouses. She could even see 2 of them every day. Were 10th-tier powerhouses everywhere in the outside world already? The outside world was too scary. Lantiste might have been able to live peacefully for 1,000 years because of this cursed light screen. The merfolk had similar thoughts. Gina's brief words had already revealed the difference between Lantiste and the outside world without a doubt. If they had to be bullied and enslaved by other races after leaving the sea, they might as well stay under the sea. Even if they were to face the terrifying nether sharks, they would only die. Everyone's sudden silence made Gina at a loss. Everyone who was extremely agitated just now felt like they had been hit in the head. She didn't know what she had said wrong. Mr. Meg and the rest are very nice. Those who came to the restaurant to eat are also very nice. Everyone is very nice, Gina explained. She could feel everyone's fear, but she didn't understand why they were so fearful. Gina's consolation calmed everyone down a little. The high priest looked at Gina and asked, "Gina, how many of our people can gain the ability to breathe on land?" No matter what the outside world was like, Lantiste was about to face an attack from the nether sharks. These divine medicines could at least allow some of the people to gain the ability to break free from the cursed barrier and leave Lantiste. If Evo City really couldn't survive the nether whirlpool's frenzy this time, then preserving the fire seed of Lantiste would become a very important matter. Gina thought for a while, and said, "Back then, I gained the ability to breathe in the air after eating a complete divine medicine. There are a total of 321 eggshells here. At least 321 of our people can gain the ability to breathe in the air." "All right." The high priest nodded with a thoughtful expression. The king composed himself and asked again, "Gina, did the Chosen One tell us how we should deal with the nether vortex?" As a king, since he couldn't lead his people to rebuild Lantiste's glory, the most important thing now was to ensure Lantiste's survival. The mermen also looked at Gina. Surviving was everyone's wish. Nether sharks. Mr. Meg said he had a way to drive the nether sharks away. He even drew a blueprint for me and asked me to hand it over to the high priest. Gina's eyes lit up. She turned sideways and took out the blueprint that Meg had given her earlier. Everyone's eyes lit up with hope. If they could expel the nether sharks, they could at least survive. However, as soon as Gina took out her blueprint, it was instantly crushed into powder by the terrifying water pressure. This. Gina stared blankly at the blueprint that had disintegrated into white powder in the water. No more. Everyone was also shocked. Staring at the slowly sinking powder, they couldn't help but blink. If the way to save Lantiste disappeared so absurdly, wouldn't that be too hard to accept? "It's all right. I have memorized the blueprint. I can draw it again," Gina hurriedly said. She waved her hand, and a ball of white sand flew up from the side of the altar. Then, she laid it flat on the altar under her guidance. She squatted down and used her finger to draw on the sand. Soon, the 2 drawings were completed. They were almost identical to the blueprint that Meg had given her earlier. One of them was a strange thing that used a wave-shaped thing to drive the nether sharks away, while the other was a person who easily shattered the nether sharks' hurricane and subdued them. "Was this really given to you by the Chosen One?" The high priest couldn't help but exclaim. Lantiste and the nether sharks had been fighting for thousands of years, but they had never found a way to break the nether vortex. However, in this drawing, that person easily broke the vortex. This was simply too unbelievable. The king and queen couldn't hide the surprise on their faces. If this could really be realized, then Lantiste's crisis would be easily resolved. Gina nodded and said, "Yes. Mr. Meg is up there now. High priest and father can go up with me to meet him. He is a very good person, and will definitely help us." "That's great. God has blessed Lantiste. He has sent the Chosen One to save us. the high priest said in a deep voice as he clenched his fists. Lantiste is finally free from the threat of the nether sharks. This is a great blessing. The king also said agitatedly. The merfolk also let out joyful cheers. The huge rock that had been pressing on everyone's hearts was finally removed. Gina, how do we consume this miracle medicine? I want to meet the honorable chosen one personally to thank him for bringing hope to Lantiste, the high priest said to Gina. The taste of the sashimi bloomed naturally when it entered the mouth. There was no fishy taste at all. Instead, it had a sweet and fresh taste. The texture of the fish was so chewy, and it blended with the soy sauce and wasabi. The more one chewed, the more fragrant it became. His mouth was full of saliva, and he almost chewed his tongue. Fragrant, sweet, sandy, salty, and spicy. The 5 flavors blended into one, and the wonderful feeling made Meg's eyebrows raise uncontrollably. The fresh taste of the sea didn't need any cooking, and it was already a delicious delicacy. Phew! This fish is simply made to be sashimi, Meg couldn't help but praise after swallowing it in one mouthful. Is it really that delicious? I want to try it too. Amy was the first to come forward. The others still maintained a spectating posture. Meg rolled up a piece of sashimi for Amy, and fed it to her. Amy frowned at first, as if she was overwhelmed by the taste of the wasabi. However, after chewing a few mouthfuls, her frown quickly dispersed, and she became happier as she chewed. Even her body couldn't help but sway slightly as she immersed herself in the delicious food. Gulp. Someone secretly swallowed their saliva. Wow. This sashimi is so delicious. Father, I want more. Amy swallowed the fish in her mouth, and immediately said to Meg. All right, I'll get some for you. Meg nodded with a smile. He picked up another piece of sashimi and wrapped it with wasabi, and fed it to Amy. It looks really delicious. I want to try it too. Yabemia quickly joined the group of people who wanted to try it. She imitated Meg and wrapped the wasabi with the fish, dipped it in the soy sauce, and put it into her mouth. Oh my god! Why does the fish taste like this? Why isn't there any fishy taste at all? Mia was shocked as she felt the wonderful taste wreaking havoc in her mouth. Chapter 1085. They were intoxicated by the deliciousness of the sashimi and fell into the trap of the grilled fish. The big crabs that were caught did not require any seasoning. They were steamed in the pot for a short while, and they could enjoy the ultimate plump taste. Seafood was caught one by one, and Meg cooked them into delicacies. When he put down his chopsticks, everyone on the wooden boat burped in unison and revealed satisfied smiles. Boss, you fed us so well tilde, it's such a blessing to come out with you. Yabemia looked at Meg, who was tidying up the kitchen utensils, with a fangirl smile on her face. She probably could not find another man like him in this world. Elizabeth looked at Mia, and then at Meg. She frowned slightly. It was undeniable that Meg was indeed a very outstanding man. She had not seen anyone in the dragon tribe that could be compared to him in terms of character and ability. However, the difference in lifespan between the dragon tribe and humans was too great. She did not dare to imagine the loneliness after 100 years. As an elder sister, even if Mia really had feelings for Meg, she had to remind her. As long as everyone likes it, Meg replied with a smile. It felt good to gain a little fangirl. But why isn't Sister Gina back yet? Did she run into some trouble? Amy asked worriedly as she leaned against the side of the boat and looked into the water. I heard from Grandpa that there are many ferocious magical beasts in the sea. What if Sister Gina runs into danger in the sea alone? Anna's little face was also full of worry. The sea is Gina's home. She can unleash her abilities to the maximum in the water, so there shouldn't be too much of a problem, Meg said. However, there was also a hint of doubt in his eyes. Gina had been gone for 2 to 3 hours. With her speed, she should have returned by now. He was confident that the ruler of the mermaid tribe would soon come to negotiate with him after seeing the blueprint. Amy turned to look at Meg and said with anticipation, Father, why don't we go down and take a look? I've never been to the sea before. It must be super fun down there, right? This. Meg looked embarrassed. He had just escaped from the water, and now he had to go back into the water. He definitely wouldn't go down even if he was beaten to death. In his state, going down would only lead to death. The Jiaolong Deep-Sea Explorer is the best choice for deep-sea exploration, treasure hunting, and sightseeing. I don't want you for 10 million copper coins, I don't want you for 1 million copper coins. 499999 copper coins, I'll rent the Deep-Sea Flood Dragon Exploration Ship. 8 comfortable cabins, fully automatic driving, underwater speed up to 1000 knots, maximum depth of 16,000 meters. What was there to consider? Rent a Jiaolong deep-sea exploration vessel, bring your children and beauties, and have an unforgettable deep-sea adventure. At this moment, a water droplet-shaped submersible popped up in Meg's mind. At the same time, he heard the cheerful voice of the system. Meg! System, the way you earn money is really heartbreaking. Meg couldn't help but sigh. What do you know? Back then, in order to capture a sample of the nether shark for research, the system invested a lot of money in creating this deep-sea submarine. Now, there's no way to sell it, so I can only rely on renting it, the system blurted out. However, it quickly realized that it had said too much, and sent a smiley emoticon instead. Of course, if the host is willing to own a deep-sea submarine that belongs solely to him for a long time, that's not impossible. For just 25 million copper coins, this deep-sea submarine that can beat all the nuclear submarines on Earth will be yours. System, you said that you used this to capture the nether shark back then? That 10th grade nether shark was also caught by this submarine? Meg didn't rush to agree, and instead asked another question. Of course. It's just a slightly bigger marine product. What's the difference? The system was a little puzzled. There's no difference. Meg's expression was a little strange. This conversation couldn't be continued. Yeah, the seawater looks so clear. It's a pity that I don't know how to swim. Otherwise, it would be super fun to go underwater. Yabemia also looked a little regretful. Actually, I know how to swim, but I've always swum in the swimming pool at home. I've never tried swimming in the sea. Barbara glanced at the surface of the sea and moved in a little. This was a little different from the swimming pool in the palace. Meg saw that everyone was interested in what was under the sea. After thinking for a while, he said to the system, 99,999 copper coins is impossible. 9,999 copper coins can't be more than that. If you're willing, I'll rent your submarine the next time I come to the beach. Based on this calculation, you only need to rent it to me 2,500 times, and you'll break even. Isn't this a good deal? Wrong. Host, you're insulting the system's intelligence. How can that be? I've always loved the young. Meg raised his eyebrows. Did the system's intelligence increase? If the system wants to break even by renting the submarine 2,500 times, then the rental price for each time must be 10,000 copper coins. The price that the host has offered is already below the system's bottom line, the system said seriously. Alright, I'll give you a raise of 1 copper coin, but you have to guarantee that the equipment on your submarine to hunt nether sharks can be used. Moreover, I need to have enough authority to use it. This is to ensure the safety of the person renting it. That shouldn't be a problem, right? Meg rolled his eyes and said with an expression as if he had suffered a great loss. Deal. The host has the highest authority to use the submarine and has obtained the system's guarantee of safety. The system agreed readily. Mag coughed softly to interrupt the ladies' discussion, and smilingly said, if all of you really want to go into the water, there's a way. I've been researching a submarine recently, and I can give it a try with all of you. Submarine? Where is it? Father, you didn't leave it at home, did you? Amy asked curiously as she walked around Meg but still couldn't find any submarine. The girls also looked at Meg with some confusion. A submarine that could fit everyone definitely wouldn't be small. Could it be that Meg also had a space ring on him? No, I brought it. It's over there. Meg reached out and pointed at the surface of the water. Everyone's gaze followed the direction of his finger. The empty surface of the water was still empty. The awkward silence lasted for 2 minutes. Meg's mouth twitched, and he awkwardly retracted his finger. What kind of lousy delivery was this? The estimated time of arrival was completely inaccurate. Bullshit. He wanted a refund. Boom. Just as Meg was about to say something to ease the awkwardness, a huge metal ball in the shape of a water droplet fell from the sky and landed at the spot where Meg had pointed earlier, creating a huge splash. Chapter 1086. The wooden boat swayed violently from the waves, and everyone on the boat stared in shock at the huge piece of metal that had appeared out of thin air. Mag was also a little dumbfounded. The thing standing on the surface of the water was indeed the submarine that the system had shown him. However, compared to the picture, this gigantic object standing in front of him, which was over 30 meters tall and had a metallic sheen on its surface, was clearly more impactful. The streamlined shape of the water droplet was completely superior to the clumsy deep-sea submersibles of the past, and it gave off a hint of extraterrestrial technology. However, this shape looked a little familiar. Wow, it's so big, Amy exclaimed. Boss, how did you bring it here? Yabemia also asked in surprise. I also borrowed a spatial ring before coming here, Meg replied casually. He had been a little rash in presenting this treasure, and it was best to keep a low profile. Fortunately, everyone's attention was attracted by the submarine, and no one paid much attention to Meg's words. Meg felt his pocket sink, and he reached out to touch it. It was an operation screen that was the size of a cell phone, and the operation method was directly transmitted to his mind by the system. All right, we can go in now. Meg tapped on the hatch, and a door appeared on the water droplet-shaped submarine. A transparent bridge extended from the exit to the wooden boat, connecting the boat and the submarine together. Then I'm going. Amy was the first to jump onto the transparent bridge, and ran toward the submarine. The other women also stepped onto the transparent bridge with curious expressions, and walked toward the hatch. This metal ball looked very high-class, and even the ladder was made of crystal. Soon, only Meg and Ugly Duckling were left on the wooden boat, and it didn't dare to move. Meg looked at the glass bridge, and his expression was still calm, but his legs were already trembling uncontrollably. He was already starting to regret his decision. Why did he agree to such an unreasonable request? Wasn't that the same as pushing himself into a fire pit? Glancing at the glass bridge and the turbulent waves under the bridge, he felt as if his legs were filled with lead and were completely out of his control. Ugly Duckling, you're so timid. Hurry up and come here. Don't make father wait for you. Amy stood at the cabin door with her hands on her hips with a disdainful expression. Meow tilde Ugly Duckling meowed with an aggrieved expression. It looked up at Meg, but still didn't dare to move. Meg blushed upon hearing Amy's words. He looked at Ugly Duckling, feeling as if they were heroes. No, I can't let Amy think I'm a coward. Meg took a deep breath, picked up Ugly Duckling, and stepped onto the glass bridge. The glass bridge above the surface of the sea swayed a little. Mag looked down instinctively. Under the transparent glass, he could see the turbulent waves. The dizziness came over him again. Meanwhile, Ugly Duckling in his arms was already staring blankly at the sky. Oh no! Meg was shocked. He hurriedly closed his eyes and ran towards the submarine door with Ugly Duckling in his arms. After estimating that they were almost there, Meg opened his eyes and almost bumped into the girls who were squeezing at the cabin door. He stopped by a hair's breadth. Looking at their expressions, he laughed awkwardly, and said, "Let's go in. It's cold outside." The girls turned and went in. Only then did Meg hold onto the edge of the cabin door to catch his breath. Then, he wiped the cold sweat off his forehead without batting an eyelid. He stood up straight again and strode into the submarine. The interior of the submarine was surprisingly spacious. There were 2 seats in the cockpit. Apart from the 6 fixed seats in the cabin, there was also quite a lot of moving space. The interior of the submarine was mainly silver. The cool lights made the entire submarine look very sci-fi. System, you're good. Meg looked around. It was perfectly in line with his imagination of extraterrestrial technology. He couldn't help but praise it in his heart. If the host likes it, the system can reluctantly part with it and sell the submarine to the host at a price of 1 copper coin. The system will also be responsible for lifetime maintenance, the system quickly replied. It's okay. I'm pretty good renting it. Meg chuckled. No matter how good this submarine was, it would be good enough if he could drive it 250 times in his life. Why would he spend $25 million to buy it? He wasn't a fool. The cabin door closed, and the originally silver exterior of the submarine slowly became transparent. Even the ground under their feet became transparent. From the inside of the submarine, they could see everything 360 degrees without any blind spots. The view was extremely wide. Wow. Awesome. Amy exclaimed softly. She lay on the edge of the cabin and looked outside with surprise. Awesome. We can actually see everything outside. It will definitely be beautiful when we go into the water. The ladies all covered their mouths. This was even more miraculous than magic. They were looking at Mag in a different light now. So, apart from being a top-notch cook, the things that Boss came up with were also very impressive. The floor suddenly became transparent. Meg's legs went weak, and he almost fell to the ground. Luckily, he held onto the chair and sat down. Meow. Ugly Duckling also let out a scream and jumped into Amy's arms. It hugged its head with both hands and buried itself. Host, look. This is the system's user-friendly design. Sitting in the submarine, you can see the underwater world 360 degrees without any blind spots. It comes with its own lights that can illuminate the sea with a radius of 1,000 meters. It's really the best tool for underwater exploration and sightseeing. Are you sure you don't want to consider it? The system continued to praise itself. Do you have to be so exaggerated? Meg rolled his eyes. He looked down carefully at the turbulent seawater below and took a few deep breaths to adjust his mentality. Since he was already in the submarine, there was no turning back. He had to go into the water now. Moreover, Meg was indeed curious about what kind of place the merfolk lived in, and what kind of monsters the nether sharks were. Naturally, it was best to go into the water and see for himself. System, go to the border of Lanteast closest to the nether sharks. I want to see what kind of monsters the nether sharks are, Meg said in his heart. A location appeared on the operation screen immediately. Veril. Alright, everyone, go back to your seats first. We have to prepare to set off. Meg turned around and said. Amy ran over with Ugly Duckling in her arms. She sat beside Meg in the co-pilot seat, and buckled her seatbelt automatically. After making sure that everyone was seated, Meg pressed the start button in front of him. The submarine shook slightly, and then dived into the water. Veril Town. Early this morning, the news of the nether sharks' invasion had spread to Veril. All the residents in the town had received orders to pack their things immediately and await orders to evacuate to the capital, Evo City. Duel, that's great. We can finally go to the capital. Moreover, we don't have to hand the crescent fish over to Uncle Butler. We can eat it on the way. In a rundown little house, the young girl, Callie, grabbed Jewel's hand with an excited smile on her face. In the past, the nether sharks only went to Rock City to avoid danger when they invaded. Why are we retreating directly to Evo City this time? This doesn't seem normal. Jewel tied up his bag with a puzzled expression. Right at this moment, a sharp sound of a conch suddenly rang out from outside the town. Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1087. The nether sharks are attacking. Jewel's expression changed. The sound of the conch was the highest level of warning. It meant that the attacking nether sharks were very powerful. Didn't they say there were 5 more days? How did they arrive so quickly? Carly's face turned pale immediately. She knew very well how terrifying the nether sharks were. She thought that she would not have to worry about them after going to the capital city. She did not expect the nether sharks to attack before they even set off. Carly, stay at home and don't run around. I'll go check on the situation. Jewel picked up the spear at the side and turned to walk out of the door. Jewel. Carly reached out and grabbed the corner of Jewel's shirt. Jewel turned to look at her. Be careful, Carly said softly as she let go. It's not a big deal. I'll be back soon. Jewel reached out and rubbed Carly's hair with a relaxed smile before turning to leave. The sound of the conch horn spread throughout Veril Town. A pale blue light shield rose from the town and enveloped it. Hundreds of mermaid warriors gathered outside the town and looked into the dark distance with solemn expressions. "Mayor, we've received news that a large nether shark is leading 2 medium-sized nether sharks towards our town. They'll be here soon. What should we do now?" a merman asked anxiously as he looked at the elderly merman standing in the middle. The other mermaids also looked worried. The strongest among them, Mayor Cattle, was only an 8th-tier powerhouse. Other than that, there were only 3 6th-tier mermaids in the town. The rest of the mermaids were all below 6th tier. Although Cattle was of the same level as the large nether shark, the nether shark's terrifying nether whirlwind and recovery ability made it invincible among those of the same level. With Veryl's defensive ability, it would not be able to last long against the 3 nether sharks. Once it lost its defense, the town would face destruction. Cattle rose slowly and turned to look at the mermaid warriors. He said loudly, "I've already sent the news back to Rock City and the capital city. I believe there will be reinforcements coming to support us soon. What we need to do is to hold back the 3 nether sharks before the reinforcements arrive and not let them enter Veryl. Let's go." The mermaid warriors replied in unison. Their morale was instantly boosted. Around the altar, the high priest was calling out names and distributing mud casings. Every mermaid clan expert who was called out had a look of joy on their faces. They respectfully held the mud casings carefully, took a deep breath, and stepped into the waterproof space. They put the mud casings into their mouths, chewed, and swallowed. Cough, cough, cough. Here. All kinds of choking sounds could be heard. One by one, the merfolk clutched their throats and coughed out tears, but they didn't dare to spit them out. This was the miracle medicine that Her Royal Highness had obtained from the Chosen One after going through countless difficulties and dangers. It was also the hope of the mermaid clan. Even if it was hard to swallow, they had to swallow it and pretend to be happy. Don't just eat it. Actually, it won't be that bad if you eat it with seawater, Gina quickly reminded the merfolk powerhouses as she looked at their flushed faces. When the merfolk heard that, they quickly poked their heads out and drank a big mouthful of seawater. Indeed, after soaking in seawater, the mud casings that were as hard as rocks and hard to swallow became much softer and easier to swallow. Even more miraculously, although the mud casings didn't have any taste, they turned into a warm current after swallowing it. It melted into their limbs and bones, and a strange feeling gradually appeared. Their footsteps became light, and their bodies seemed to be floating by themselves. The merfolk who were holding their breath in the waterproof space began to have a strange feeling. The air that they were originally unable to breathe began to become more comfortable. Gradually, they could even breathe in through their noses to obtain some oxygen to relieve the feeling of suffocation. This change was slow, but it was clearly visible. The high priest, the king, and the queen were the first to eat the mud casings. At this moment, they were already trying to expel the seawater around their bodies. Then, they tried to breathe air in the waterproof space. Although it was more awkward than breathing directly in water, and the air that they breathed into their bodies through their noses seemed clumsy and obstructed, this novel feeling still surprised them. The merfolk being able to breathe air was something that the ancestors of the merfolk had been dreaming about for thousands of years. However, they obtained it after consuming a piece of godly medicine. Happiness came too easily, and the merfolk felt that it was unreal. When they completely mastered this ability to breathe, they should be able to pass through the curse seal and no longer be restricted by this small seal. The ordinary merfolk also looked at the merfolk who had consumed the mud casings with glowing eyes. Although most of the merfolk present didn't have the right to consume the godly medicine for the time being, it didn't mean that they wouldn't in the future. Your Majesty, the latest news is that 3 nether sharks have invaded in advance. They have already entered the border and are heading towards Veryl. At this moment, a merfolk warrior in armor came forward and reported anxiously to the king. The lively scene quieted down immediately. The excitement brought about by the godly medicine still couldn't make them ignore the threat of the nether sharks. How strong are the invading nether sharks? The king's expression also darkened. The residents of the border towns had yet to evacuate. If these 3 nether sharks were too strong, they might invade directly and cause unimaginable damage. one large nether shark and two medium-sized nether sharks. After receiving the distress signal, Rock City has already sent people to reinforce them, that merfolk quickly replied. The king pondered for a while, then said in a deep voice, "Pass down the order. Get the border troops to reinforce Veril as soon as possible. At the same time, order the residents to head towards Evo City immediately. The invasion of the nether sharks might be brought forward." "Yes." That merfolk replied and left quickly. The king walked to the high priest's side and said in a low voice, "High priest, what do you think now?" The high priest directly transmitted his voice to the king. "Let's follow the original plan and get everyone to retreat to Evo City. Although we've already found the chosen one, I'm afraid it'll be difficult for him to deal with all the nether sharks on his own. We have to make more preparations." The king nodded thoughtfully. "The nether sharks are acting strangely this time. I'll go to the border personally," the high priest said again. However, he didn't transmit his voice this time. Instead, he said it out loud. "But the chosen one is still waiting for us." "High priest." The king wanted to say something but stopped. Compared to a small border town, meeting the chosen one was obviously more important. The effects of the godly medicine have yet to fully take effect. I estimate it'll take at least 2 hours before we can attempt to pass through the cursed wall. The high priest shook his head. With a wave of his hand, 2 pale golden gems landed on a spell formation beside the altar. The golden glow was very fast. "I'll be back soon." The high priest stepped onto the teleportation portal. "High priest, I'll go with you." Gina also landed on the teleportation portal and stood respectfully at the side. Chapter 1088. Outside Veril town, hundreds of mermen were on standby as they looked into the distance nervously. The sky was suppressed by the dark cursed barrier. They could already see the turbulence caused by the 3 hurricanes in the distance. The water surface was shaking slightly. Other than the garrison, the young and strong mermen in the town had also come to the town to join the defense. All the mermen knew how terrifying the nether sharks were. It was meaningless to escape from the town. For the sake of their loved ones in the town, they could only fight with their backs against the wall. Even if they could not defeat the ferocious nether sharks, as long as they could hold on until the reinforcements from Rock City arrived, Veril town would be saved. This was destined to be a tragic battle. They had no way out. A large nether shark only needed 2 rounds to destroy a town. That huge hurricane with a diameter of almost 100 meters could easily destroy all the buildings. The young Jewel was standing on the wall of the town, holding a long spear tightly. The black spear looked rather old, but the tip of the spear was very sharp. This was his father's battle spear. 8 years ago, as the captain of Veril town's guards, he and his mother, who was also a warrior, died in the mouth of the nether sharks while escorting the town's residents. They only left behind this spear. 8 years was enough to make many memories blurry, but he could not forget the scene of his mother and father being torn apart by the hurricane. He had been practicing his spear skills all these years so that he could fight the nether sharks one day and avenge his parent. Cattle came to Jewel and said in a low voice, "Jewel, go back and protect Carly. My presence here is the best protection for her." Jewel looked at Cattle and said with a determined gaze, "That's a large nether shark. It's meaningless for you to stay here." Cartuor frowned. He had watched this child grow up. His father was the younger generation that he thought the most highly of. How could he watch him throw away his life? Back then, my father and mother also knew that it was meaningless for them to stay, but didn't they still stay? Jewel shook his head and gripped the spear in his hand tightly with a determined gaze. This child. Cattle seemed to see the shadow of the burly man back then. He was also someone who could not be persuaded once he made up his mind. He sighed and turned to leave. Then, he beckoned a warrior to keep an eye on him. "They are here." A fishman cried out in alarm. The huge whirlwind could be clearly seen. The huge rocks that were sucked into the whirlwind were cut into countless pieces by the black-grey wind blades. The fishes swam in all directions in fear, but the whirlwind was like a vortex with a huge suction force. It sucked in the fishes crazily and then disappeared without a trace. Within the huge black-grey vortex, a huge figure could be vaguely seen. Two smaller whirlwinds followed closely behind, sweeping all the way, leaving 3 deep ravines on the ground. It was a complete mess. The merfolk warriors paled at the sight. Although they would encounter the nether whirlwind every year, Veril had never faced such a terrifying nether shark alone. For Freyr, for our loved ones, prepare for battle, my brave warriors. Cattle raised the trident in his hand and bellowed. Fight! The mermaid warriors shouted in unison, all of them unafraid of death. Duel also shouted with a red face. His eyes were bloodshot, and the hand holding the spear was trembling slightly. It wasn't from fear, but from excitement. Ha! Cattle held the trident and appeared outside the protective barrier in the blink of an eye. The trident in his hand lit up with a bluish-purple glow, and he slashed at the whirlwind with all his might. A huge bluish-purple trident appeared, and then stabbed towards the huge whirlwind that was over 100 meters in diameter and height. The trident expanded with the wind and became 100 meters long in the blink of an eye. It smashed into the whirlwind with a huge stream of water. Everyone stared at the scene with their eyes wide open. Cattle was the strongest among them. Only he could stop that huge nether shark. Boom! The huge trident collided with the whirlwind and made a loud noise. The unstoppable whirlwind stopped suddenly, but there were no signs of it collapsing. Although the whirlwind stopped, the madly spinning wind blades were like countless sharp blades, slashing at the huge trident. Sparks burst out, and the trident shortened at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the blink of an eye, the trident head disappeared, followed by the long shaft. It was only a matter of time before it was completely worn down. On the other hand, the nether whirlwind only became a little thinner. The shadow in the whirlwind became more obvious, and its huge figure brought great pressure to everyone. Let's attack together. Cattle was not discouraged. The whirlwind of a huge nether shark was difficult to break, and this was within his expectations. Moreover, this nether shark should be evolving into a huge nether shark. His goal was to stall for time as much as possible. Countless spells flew out of the protective barrier like streams of light toward the 3 whirlwinds. The spells exploded outside the whirlwinds into beautiful fireworks, but the 3 whirlwinds did not move. However, under the nether whirlwind, the spells of the merfolk were completely useless. They could not even penetrate the whirlwind, let alone cause any substantial damage to the nether shark in the whirlwind. They could not even break through the outermost defense. This absolute difference made them feel hopeless. Hiss! At this moment, a sharp roar came from within the hurricane. It traveled along the ripples of the water. The largest hurricane spun faster and faster. The remaining trident shattered instantly. The hurricane was unstoppable as it rolled towards Veril town, sweeping up rocks and debris in the air. Oh no! Cattle frowned. With the trident in his hand, he charged toward the whirlwind brazenly. The merfolk also had strong bodies and strength. The merfolk warriors were even more fearless. A bluish-purple glow lit up on the trident and enveloped his body. He turned into a stream of light and charged toward the whirlwind. The merfolk's spells could not break through the whirlwind. If the merfolk warriors wanted to defeat the nether sharks, they had to choose close combat. Soon, a few merfolk powerhouses rushed out of the protective barrier and charged toward the other 2 whirlwinds. They were responsible for holding back the 2 medium-sized nether sharks. The trident broke a hole in the whirlwind, and cattle entered it in a flash. The whirlwind stopped moving forward. A small figure and a huge black figure were fighting fiercely in the whirlwind. Turbulence appeared in the seawater, and sharp, angry roars could be heard from time to time. PFFF. The battle did not last long. Cattle, who was covered in blood, flew out of the whirlwind with his body bent like a shrimp. He only managed to stop himself when he reached the protective barrier. He spat out a mouthful of blood and used the broken trident to stabilize himself. He stared at the nether shark that had retracted the whirlwind and revealed its huge and ferocious face. His eyes were filled with indignation. Fight to the death. The merfolk warrior's eyes were already red. Fear and despair burned into the strongest conviction. They could not win, and there was no way out. They could only fight to the death. The nether shark looked at the merfolk with its scarlet eyes, revealing 2 rows of sharp teeth. This was the most delicious food of the year. They were weak, but they liked to struggle. Hunting them was even more interesting. Bang! Right at this moment, an unknown object fell from the sky and smashed onto the head of the giant nether shark. As though it was hit by a heavy hammer, the nether shark that was about to start hunting was instantly smashed into the sea, sending rocks flying everywhere. One heavily injured large-sized nether shark and 2 medium-sized nether sharks have been detected. Do you want to start fishing? A metallic voice sounded in the cockpit. Chapter 1089. Meg listened to the notification echoing in the cabin with a dumbfounded expression. He had just recovered from the fear of the deep sea, and the submarine stopped in the blink of an eye. Also, it seemed that they had bumped into a large nether shark. Didn't they say that nether sharks were extremely powerful, that their hurricanes were immune to all magical damage, and that their recovery abilities were extremely strong? Didn't they say that nether sharks were ferocious and cruel, the overlords of the deep sea, and the killers of mermaids? Why did it feel like they were a little weak? Meg looked down at the large black shark below. There was a huge silver whirlpool tattoo on its head, but he felt that the information he had received was a little inaccurate. Wow, what a big fish. If we make it into grilled fish, we can eat it for many, many days, right? Amy exclaimed softly, her eyes full of little stars. There are so many mermaids there. Just like Sister Gina, they have beautiful fish tails. Anna pointed in the direction of Verrill Town and said in surprise, so there are males among the mermaids too. Everyone's words brought Meg back to reality. He thought for a while, and reached out to press the confirm button in front of him. Fishing command confirmed. Target, 3 nether sharks. The electronic voice sounded again. Cattle and the merfolk who were prepared to sacrifice their lives for Freyr were also looking at the huge unknown luminous object that had suddenly appeared with a shocked expression. The bright light wasn't too dazzling, but it made the huge luminous object appear particularly grand and solemn. The large nether shark that was not injured at all under the attacks of the mermaids was lying motionless in the deep pit at the bottom of the sea. The big guy that was known for its strong defense and regeneration ability was knocked unconscious so easily. Could it be that God has descended? Some mermaids exclaimed. Other than that, they could not think of any other existence that could do such a thing. So powerful. Duel, who was holding his spear and preparing to charge, opened his mouth wide as he looked at the big guy that suddenly appeared with disbelief. It was obviously not a big fish, but more like a legendary artifact drawn on an altar. Is this really God? Duel's heart began to beat violently. In addition to avenging his parents, his biggest wish was to go outside the cursed barrier that he was tired of seeing. If God really appeared, his wish might be able to come true. The High Priestess and Gina had just stepped out of the teleportation spell's range a moment before the luminous object descended from the sky. The High Priest had already raised the magic staff in his hand. Then, a beam of light descended from the sky at an unbelievable speed, knocking the nether shark into the bottom of the sea. This is a miracle. The High Priest's staff was still raised, and he looked at the object that was emitting light. His body began to tremble uncontrollably, and his wrinkled face was full of excitement. Gina was also shocked when she saw that. Even if she went all out, she could only stall the nether shark, let alone kill it in one strike. Miracle? If God himself appeared, then why did he choose Mr. Meg? She was puzzled. All the merpeople present were stunned. The 2 medium-sized nether sharks let out a shrill cry when they saw the large nether shark being knocked unconscious. Not only did they not retreat, but they also rushed toward the submarine with a violent gust of wind. How dare you disrespect God? The High Priest's face darkened, and the magic staff in his hand glowed. Just then, the floating luminous object suddenly released 2 visible ripples and flew toward the 2 gust of wind that was dozens of meters tall. Poof! The ripples swept past, and with a soft sound, the gust of wind that was indestructible and destructive in the eyes of the merpeople instantly disintegrated, revealing the 2 black sharks that were more than 80 meters long in the gust of wind. The sudden disappearance of the gust of wind obviously shocked the 2 sharks. However, before they could react, 2 silver metal balls had already exploded in front of them, turning into 2 large silver nets that wrapped around the 2 nether sharks and tightened abruptly. Hiss! The 2 nether sharks let out a mournful cry, then sank straight to the bottom of the sea. They fell to the bottom of the sea and could not move at all. Only a pair of red eyes could still move in fear. Soon, another silver metal ball exploded above the large nether shark's head, turning into an even bigger net that trapped the nether shark. The surroundings fell silent, and all the merpeople gulped. What a powerful ability! If the previous collision was a violent aesthetic, then the scene of breaking the nether whirlwind and subduing the two medium-sized nether sharks with ease was completely beyond their imagination. It even gave them the illusion that the powerful nether sharks were like weak crescent fishes in front of that luminous object. They did not even have the right to struggle. So powerful. Gina also revealed a shocked expression. This was completely beyond the scope of a battle. It looked more like a fishing operation. Their abilities were not on the same level at all. God bless Lantiste, is everything finally going to end? The high priest slowly retracted his magic staff, tidied his clothes, and slowly swam toward that luminous object that was emitting a bright light. High priest. Gina looked at the high priest's back, and hesitated for a while before following behind him. The nether sharks have been successfully subdued. The electronic voice sounded in the submarine cabin. Meg blinked, and looked down at the three nether sharks that were completely immobilized by the silver net. His expression became a little strange as he looked down at the merpeople who were staring at him with their mouths agape. This aquatic dragon from the system was a little too powerful. It was practically a deep-sea overlord-class submarine. The nether sharks that had caused the merpeople to be in a terrible state were just like slightly larger aquatic products in front of this submarine. They did not have any ability to resist at all. System, what material is that fishing net of yours made of? Are you sure it won't break free? Meg asked curiously. The fishing net is made of super nanomaterials by the system. Its strength is far beyond the nether shark's strength limit. You don't have to worry about it breaking free. However, are you sure you don't want to consider buying this aquatic dragon deep-sea submarine? With it, you can do whatever you want in this ocean. The system's proud voice sounded, and then it grabbed the opportunity to continue promoting the submarine. I'm sorry, I'm not interested. Meg rejected immediately. So powerful. In the submarine's cabin, everyone was looking at Meg in awe. Clearly, they were all stunned by the earlier scene. Elizabeth could clearly sense the ability of that large nether shark below. That was an overlord of the ocean with abilities above level 8. How could it be knocked unconscious by Meg's strange-looking submarine? Meanwhile, those two level 6 and level 7 nether sharks were also extremely difficult to deal with in the deep sea. However, they were also easily subdued by Meg. Chapter 1090. What the hell is this thing? How can a normal human unleash such terrifying power? If we were in the sea, could it be that even I would not be a match for him? Countless questions flashed across Elizabeth's mind, and all of them shocked her. Her concept of the upper limit of a normal human's ability was completely overturned at this moment. Yarbemia finally closed her mouth with much difficulty. She swallowed her saliva, and said, if I remember correctly, the thing that Gina mentioned that caused Lantiste to be in danger was that big shark with a hole in its head, right? Yes, it's exactly the same as Sister Gina's drawing. Anna nodded. Then, she looked at Meg with admiration, and said, Uncle Meg, you did it. You saved this town just like in Sister Gina's drawing. I knew it. Father is the best. Amy hugged Meg's arm happily with a proud smile on her face. She looked outside, and suddenly stopped. She pointed outside with her little finger, and said, Isn't that Sister Gina? Is she here to welcome us? Meg looked up after hearing that. Gina was following behind an old merman in a black cloak, and was swimming slowly towards the submarine. Gina and that old merman stopped about 100 meters away from the glowing object. They placed their hands on their chests, and bowed respectfully. Honorable God, I am Dexter, the High Priest of Lantiste, your most loyal believer. Thank you for saving the people of Lantiste. It's the High Priest and Princess Gina. They are here to welcome God, right? Then, let's hurry and welcome them too. The merfolk of Veril quickly noticed the arrival of the High Priest and Gina. They were surprised, and hurriedly bowed respectfully in the direction of the submarine. Gina is the princess of the merfolk tribe. This old merman seems to have a higher status than Gina. However, what did he say? I don't understand at all. What should I do? Meg also heard the old merman's voice, but he couldn't understand it. Meg scratched his head. The language barrier was indeed a headache. The subsequent negotiations for the establishment of the fishery would most likely be conducted with this old mermaid. The language barrier would most likely be the biggest obstacle. After all, not every mermaid was as simple as Gina. Unknown language detected. Collecting language samples. Sufficient samples have been collected. Analyzing in progress. Language sample collection and analysis complete. Successfully deciphered and loaded into the language library. Would you like to perform simultaneous interpretation? At this moment, the electronic voice sounded again. Hey! Meg was stunned. Looking at the flashing red confirm button in front of him, his eyes lit up. He didn't expect this submarine to have language learning and simultaneous interpretation functions. However, Meg reacted quickly. He said unhappily in his heart, "System, you can fucking translate the language of the merfolk tribe a long time ago, right?" He recalled that he had been communicating with Gina using sign language every day. Simple communication required guessing and guessing. The process was extremely difficult. In the end, the system's simultaneous interpretation function solved the problem. Meg was stunned. The system said, "Huh." The host didn't take the initiative to ask. Meg raised his eyebrows. Speaking of which, he had indeed forgotten the first rule of asking the system if there was a problem. Hey! What did it say just now? Father, are you hiding a little elf here? Amy looked around, trying to find where the voice came from. I think I heard simultaneous interpretation, but what is that? Yarbemia asked, confused. Everyone looked at Meg. This was something created by Meg. Its unbelievable speed and ability to observe the underwater world from all angles had already amazed them. It's a small invention. Now we can understand the merfolk's language. Meg shrugged, and clicked on the confirm button for simultaneous interpretation calmly. Honorable God, I am Dexter, the High Priest of Lantiste, your most loyal believer. The High Priest's voice sounded again, but this time, it was translated into the common language of the continent. Honorable God! Meg raised his eyebrows. This High Priest of Lantiste seemed to have misunderstood something. Gina had always called him the Chosen One. It seemed like the High Priest mistook him for a god after seeing his previous actions. I can really understand it now. But Father, why did she call us Honorable God? Are we really that powerful? Amy looked at Meg strangely. That is a 10th tier great magic caster. Elizabeth looked at the High Priest softly before looking at the merfolk and that small town in the distance. She seemed to be in deep thought. She didn't expect there to be an unknown merfolk tribe in the deep sea. Furthermore, there were an unknown number of 10th tier powerhouses in the tribe. If the merfolk were to escape from the bottom of the sea, it would definitely cause a huge impact on the current order of the Norland continent. This should be someone with a higher status in the merfolk tribe. He might have misunderstood our identity. Meg looked at everyone and said, apart from sending Gina home, our other objective is to establish a supply chain for the nether shark's fins and lips. The restaurant's next dish needs these 2 ingredients, so I need the merfolk's help. Then, can't we just tell Big Sister Gina directly? She will definitely help us because she is one of us, Amy said with a smile. Yes, Gina is super nice. She will definitely provide the ingredients for the restaurant. MIA nodded. This is not something Gina can decide. Meg shook his head. He looked at the respectful High Priest outside, and said, he should be the one who can make the decision. Then, what do we need to do? Elizabeth asked Meg. Nether sharks were very powerful beings to the merfolk tribe. It was not a reasonable request to ask them to risk their lives to capture nether sharks for the restaurant. Gina indeed did not have the right to make the decision. The High Priest looked down and stood there with a respectful expression. High Priest. Gina wanted to say something after waiting for a long time, but there was no response from that glowing object. "Wait quietly," the high priest said softly as he raised his hand. Gina swallowed the words that were about to come out of her mouth. She lowered her head and kept quiet. "Since he has misunderstood, then let's make this misunderstanding even deeper." A smile appeared at the corner of Meg's mouth. He pushed the lighting effect to the maximum, and then adjusted the voice changer to sage mode. He signaled for everyone to keep quiet, and clicked on the simultaneous interpretation microphone. "You don't have to be so polite. The person I have chosen is already waiting for you on the surface of the sea. He will guide you in the direction of Lantis. No pop-up window." Chapter 1091. The solemn voice traveled clearly into the ears of every merman. The high priest raised his head. His body was trembling slightly, and his eyes were sparkling. It had been 1,000 years. Lantis had been abandoned by God for 1,000 years. Finally, God had blessed Lantis again. The high priest prostrated himself on the ground, and respectfully said, "God, Lantis will serve you and the person you choose forever. Please remove this cursed barrier for 1,000 years for us, and get rid of the nether sharks that feed on the people of Lantis." Gina and the merfolk warriors of Veril also prostrated themselves on the ground, expressing their utmost respect to that holy artifact. "The person I choose will help you. He is a good man." The solemn voice sounded again. The light on the artifact became even more dazzling, and then it disappeared without a trace in a flash of light. "He is talking about Mr. Meg. He is really a good man. So God thinks the same way too," Gina murmured to herself. "Has God left?" The merfolk raised their heads and looked at the remaining 3 nether sharks that were tightly bound. The artifact that carried God had disappeared. The high priest slowly straightened his body, and looked up at the faintly visible light that had completely disappeared. He then retracted his gaze, and said to the merfolk in front of Veril town, "God is still watching over us. Lantis will be able to break free from the curse very soon." "That's great." The merfolk cheered. "Break free from the curse and leave the bottom of the sea." Duel also had a surprised expression on his face. He looked up at the dark barrier. He would be able to see the outside world very soon. Then, his gaze landed on the 3 nether sharks that were tightly bound. He hesitated for a while, but still mustered his courage and went forward. He looked at the high priest who was performing the healing spell on Maya Cattle, and respectfully asked, "High priest, may I request to kill one of the nether sharks?" The high priest looked at Duel in surprise. "Aren't you afraid of it?" "They killed my parents, but I am not afraid of them. I want to kill them to avenge my parents." Duel shook his head, and gripped the spear in his hand tightly as he stared at the 3 nether sharks. The high priest stared at Dur for a long time, and a smile appeared on his wrinkled face. He nodded slightly, and said, "God has subdued those 3 nether sharks. I think he will agree to let you handle one of them." "Thank you, high priest." Duel was overjoyed. "You should be thanking God." The high priest took back the magic ball. Cattle's injuries had already healed. "Thank you, Lord God," Duel said respectfully as he swam toward a medium-sized nether shark with his spear. A golden-red spear gleam that was half an arm's length lit up on the spear. Duel used all his strength to stab the spear into the vortex pattern above the nether shark's head. He had long heard that this was the nether shark's only weakness. Hiss! The nether shark let out a shrill cry and struggled frantically. However, it was entangled by the silver fishing net and could not move an inch. The struggle did not last long. When the cries stopped, the nether shark stopped moving completely. Duel pulled out his spear, and fresh blood spurted out from the nether shark's vortex. "Father, Mother, I have avenged all of you," Duel murmured with tears streaming down his face. The residents of the town had all come out at some point. "Duel." Carly rushed out from the crowd and hugged Duel. Tears were streaming down her face as well. "You must be the mayor of Veril. Pass down the order for all the merfolk in the town to march toward Evo City," the high priest said to Cattle. "Yes," Cattle replied respectfully. The high priest glanced at Duel and the nether shark that had stopped moving. A smile of admiration appeared at the corner of his mouth. That little fellow is a good seedling. If he is willing, let him join the garrison directly after going to Evo City. Just say that I asked him to go." Cattle's face lit up. He nodded, and said, "I think that little fellow will be very willing." "Gina, let's go," the high priest said, and a faint golden array formation started to appear under his feet. Gina stepped into the range of the array formation. A golden light flashed, and the two of them disappeared. "Gina, tell me in detail about that chosen one. The future of Lantiste is in his hands. Mr. Meg, he is a good person." The submarine accelerated instantly, and left the bottom of the sea. It only started to slow down when it reached a depth of about 5,000 meters, and slowly rose to the surface. "Father, did you lie to them just now?" Amy blinked and looked at Meg with a shocked expression. It was her first time seeing her father lie. Everyone in the submarine looked at Meg with a surprised expression. In their impression, Meg had always been an honest and steady person. "This is not a lie. It is just to build a stable and strong friendship between both parties." Meg shook his head, and seriously said, "Am I not a good person?" Everyone thought about it, and suddenly understood. Of course, Mr. Meg was a good person. Thinking about it this way, he was indeed not lying. "I knew father would not lie." A bright smile appeared on Amy's face. Meg heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. As a role model for Amy to learn from, this honest persona could not be broken. Moreover, he did not do anything outrageous. He just took the opportunity to make the following negotiations easier. He would also do his best to help Lantiste. A large school of fish swam past the submarine. Ugly Duckling, who was already used to it, lay in front of the transparent window and stretched out its claws, trying to catch those fish that were approaching. Its claws scratched the glass anxiously. "Ugly Duckling, do you want me to let you out?" Amy asked with a smile as she went up to it. Ugly Duckling nodded first, but quickly reacted. It turned to look at Amy with a bitter expression. "Are you the devil?" Meg looked at the beautiful scenery at the bottom of the sea through the transparent submarine. He used the fishing equipment to catch a few more fish that looked delicious or pretty. He estimated that the merfolk should be coming up soon, so he steered the submarine to the surface and returned to the wooden boat. Mr. Meg is God's spokesperson, and also Lantiste's savior. We have to give him the highest respect and treatment. In the center of the altar, the high priest looked at the merfolk standing in front of the altar with a serious expression. "Yes." The merfolk replied in unison. Their expressions were not ambiguous at all. Previously, the high priest had already shown everyone the scene of God descending and easily subduing the 3 nether sharks. Now, there was only worship in the merfolk's hearts. The king also went up, and solemnly said to everyone, "The future of Lantiste is entrusted to all of you." Chapter 1092. Dong, dong, dong. Woo, woo, woo. Not long after Meg and the rest arrived on the wooden ship, and before they could start the second round of the feast, a series of orderly drumming and conch sounds could be heard. The seawater in front of the wooden ship parted, and the high priest in black mage robes stood in the middle with Gina. 300 merpeople powerhouses slowly rose from the water. "They're here." Meg's eyes lit up. He bought the simultaneous translation system for the Lantiste language with the system for 250 copper coins. From now on, he could communicate with the merpeople without any obstacles. However, what the hell was this extravagance? Meg looked at the merpeople who were lined up neatly and holding all kinds of strange-looking musical instruments in their hands. Did Gina give all the mud casings to the merpeople's honor guard? Wow, it's so majestic. Amy opened her eyes wide as she looked at the merpeople who were playing attentively. Everyone on the wooden ship was shocked when they saw this scene. What a powerful lineup. Elizabeth's cold eyes revealed a hint of surprise. This was not an ordinary honor guard. Other than the high priest, there were 10 10th-tier magic casters in the team, and the rest were mostly 8th-tier and 9th-tier powerhouses. Such strength had even surpassed the goblins and dwarfs. Meg actually also sensed the strength of these merpeople. Other than being shocked, he also had some new ideas in his mind. A force that had not shown itself for thousands of years, A powerful race that no one knew about. If he could make use of them, they might become a super powerful trump card for him. Mr. Meg. Gina smiled at Meg, and then whispered to the high priest beside her, "High priest, that is Mr. Meg. That cute little girl is his daughter, Amy. The other beautiful ladies are the waitresses in the restaurant. The chosen one." The high priest looked at Meg first. He had seen this human in the revelation half a month ago. Now that he saw him in person, he seemed to be just an ordinary human. He did not sense any magical aura from him, but he had a very unique temperament that made him impossible to ignore. Then, his gaze fell on Amy, and his pupils shrank as a look of amazement appeared in his eyes. A 4-year-old 6th-tier half-elf magus. There was actually such a genius in this world. Then, his gaze swept across the people on the ship. An 8th-tier frost dragon, a 7th-tier spatial magician. Just as Gina had said, the strength of the waiters in this restaurant was enough to make people take notice of them. This made him think even more highly of Mag. He was indeed the chosen one of God's chosen ones. The high priest bowed slightly, and gratefully said to Meg, "Greetings, Mr. Meg. I am the high priest of Lantiste, Dexter. Thank you for saving Gina and coming all the way here to give us the miracle medicine." Gina glanced at Meg and said softly, "High priest, Mr. Meg doesn't understand our language. Do you need me to? You don't have to be so polite, high priest. Perhaps this is all fate. Miss Gina has also helped my restaurant a lot," Meg said in fluent Lantistean language with a smile. Looking at Gina, whose mouth was slightly agape with a look of disbelief, Meg explained, "I can understand Lantistean language now. This must be an ability bestowed by God." The high priest's eyes lit up. Lantiste had been isolated from the outside world for thousands of years. They didn't know the language of the outside world, and the people of the outside world naturally didn't know Lantistean language, either. This made him even more certain that Meg, who was God's spokesperson, had received an unbelievable ability from God. His expression became even more respectful. Gina obviously thought so too. She looked at Meg with stars in her eyes. He was indeed Mr. Meg. He was indeed very impressive. Meg looked at the high priest's expression, and had a general idea of how to proceed with the negotiation. The bluff that he took advantage of earlier had received a very good response. Father can speak the mermaid language too?" Amy looked at Meg curiously. Everyone on the ship was also surprised. It was already surprising enough that Meg's little invention could convert the merfolk's language into the continent's common language. Now, he could even speak the merfolk's language. Could this be a new invention of his? "High priest, let them stop the music first." Meg looked at the high priest with a smile. Although the merfolk's music was sonorous and very refreshing, such sonorous music didn't seem very suitable for a negotiation. "Stop." The high priest raised his hand, and the music stopped immediately. The merfolk put down the drum and conch in their hands, and looked at Meg with gratitude. After all, they were one of the few powerhouses among the merfolk. Their abilities were all above the 8th tier. It was a little embarrassing for them to play the drums and gongs here. After the music stopped, Meg looked at the high priest, and went straight to the point. "Regarding Lantiste's predicament, Gina had already told me before I came, and I also received some special revelations from that person. I can help Lantiste solve the problem of the cursed barrier and the nether sharks. However, in return, I also need some help and some promises from Lantiste." The high priest's eyes lit up. It must be a revelation from God. He was full of confidence that Meg could solve Lantiste's survival predicament. As long as Lantiste could survive, any condition could be negotiated. "Mr. Meg, what do you need Lantiste to do? What kind of promises do you need us to make? Please tell us. We will try our best to cooperate," the high priest said. "First condition, Lantiste has to promise not to invade the continent and participate in the fight for territory within 100 years. Second condition, after Lantiste escapes, you have to help me do 3 things unconditionally. The details are still undecided, but I can guarantee that Lantiste will not pay an unacceptable price. Third condition, I need Lantiste's help to build a deep-sea nether shark fishery and provide a fixed amount of nether shark's lips and fins for my restaurant. I will discuss the construction and daily operation of the fishery with you in detail later. Meg looked at the high priest, and smilingly said, "My conditions are as stated above. I hope the high priest can consider it carefully." The high priest was deep in thought after hearing that. The other merfolk powerhouses were also deep in thought. Meg stood at the side with a calm expression, waiting for their decision. The high priest communicated with the few of them briefly through voice transmission. After a moment of silence, he looked at Meg and solemnly said, "If Mr. Meg can guarantee that Lantiste will never be harassed by the nether sharks, and that every citizen can pass through the cursed barrier freely, I can promise the 3 conditions you mentioned on behalf of Lantiste." Chapter 1093. The fact that all of you are able to stand here and talk to me means that you can confirm that I can indeed give you the ability to pass through the cursed barrier. However, there are many people in Lantiste, and the amount of mud casings I can provide is limited. Therefore, I cannot promise how long it will take for all the merfolk in Lantiste to obtain this freedom. Meg looked at the high priest, and also solemnly said, "However, I can guarantee that from today onwards, the people of Lantiste will not be harassed by the nether sharks. Lantiste will always remember your kindness." The high priest placed his hand in front of his chest and bowed. Gina and the mermaids bowed as well. "You're welcome. This is God's guidance." A smile appeared on Meg's face. It was a very successful negotiation. He had successfully established a supply chain for the nether shark's fins and lips. More importantly, he had obtained the promise of help from a powerful race 3 times. This was a surprise army with more than 10 10th-tier powerhouses. This would become one of his most powerful trump cards. Furthermore, no one in this world knew of the existence of such a powerful race. A smile also appeared on the high priest's face. This was indeed God's guidance. From today onwards, Lantiste was going to open a new chapter. Without the harassment of the nether sharks, they had a clear hope for the outside world. "That's great. Mr. Meg is really a good person." Gina's smile was also very bright. Although she didn't expect Mr. Meg to raise those 3 requests, the outcome was perfect. The negotiation was also very successful. Lantiste had obtained a better result than expected. The others on the wooden boat were dumbfounded the whole time. They didn't know what Meg and the high priest were talking about. However, when they saw the merfolk greeting Meg and both parties smiling, they also smiled. It seemed like the negotiation was very successful. "It feels like the negotiation was very successful. Boss is actually so good at negotiation," Yarbemia mumbled softly. "Of course. Father is super awesome," Amy said proudly. Her little face was full of pride. Meg took out a pen and paper and wrote 2 contracts on water-resistant paper. Then, he and the high priestess signed the contracts separately. The negotiation came to a successful conclusion. "It's a pleasure working with you." Meg extended his hand to the high priest. The high priest was slightly taken aback. It seemed that this was the social etiquette of humans. After some hesitation, he reached out his hand and gently shook Meg's hand. "I look forward to working with you." After signing the contract, Meg began to hand over the magnetic field interference release ball and the ultrasonic isolation wall that the system had prepared. The former was used to destroy the nether shark's nether whirlwind and create an opportunity for the merfolk to engage in close combat with the nether shark. Knowing the nether shark's fatal weakness, the mermaids were not afraid to fight the nether shark without its tornado defense. The latter's function was to use the ultrasonic balls to release ultrasonic waves so that the nether sharks could not get close to the area surrounded by the sound wave wall. Thus, they could easily build a defensive fortress or build a deep-sea fishery. There were only 2 buttons on the switch, and it was easy to operate. Is this the divine weapon that made the nether shark's whirlwind ineffective? The high priest held the magnetic field ball with both hands as if he was looking at an extremely precious treasure. "You can say that." Meg nodded. He still felt a little guilty about pretending to be a god. "God, you're too generous." The high priest's expression was full of respect and gratitude. The number of magnetic field balls is limited. However, after releasing them, the whirlwind of the nether sharks within a radius of 1,000 meters will be dispelled. It should be enough if you use it together with a small team. The number of ultrasonic balls is sufficient for you to set up in important cities and towns to form a defensive fortress. When the nether sharks invade, you can retreat into the fortress to recuperate and wait for the nether sharks to leave. I've already confirmed the location of the nether shark fishery. It's in that big canyon. You can lure a sufficient number of nether sharks into the canyon or capture them and throw them into the canyon. Then, you can use the ultrasonic wall to block the gap in the canyon. This is the map of the canyon's location and the layout of the ultrasonic balls. I'm rearing the nether sharks to obtain their shark fins and shark lips. Meg continued to teach the high priest the layout method, the construction of the nether shark's deep-sea farm, and the construction of the industrial chain in detail. These were all things that the system had prepared long ago. Meg was only a lobbyist, so it was very simple. The high priest, who was always calm, got more and more excited as he listened. When Meg was done, he looked at Meg with some surprise, and said, "Mr. Meg is too thoughtful. With these divine weapons, the people of Lanteast won't have to worry about being harassed by the nether sharks anymore. Furthermore, they can turn the tables and treat them as prey. The nether sharks are also considered a rare species. I still hope that the merfolk of Lanteast can restrain themselves a little." Meg thought to himself. Of course, he wouldn't say that out loud. For the past 1,000 years, the nether sharks had almost driven Lanteast to extinction. Countless merfolk had died in the mouths of the nether sharks. Persuading others to be magnanimous was something he couldn't do. The high priest used a crystal ball to store the tens of thousands of metal balls that Meg took out into the crystal ball. It seemed like it was also a storage equipment with a huge space. "Mr. Meg, thank you for everything that you have done for Lanteast. The invasion of the nether sharks is imminent, and I need to return to Lanteast immediately to make arrangements. I will bid farewell to you for today. I will definitely visit you personally to thank you in the future." The high priest kept the divine weapons. He was concerned about Lanteast, so he prepared to bid farewell to Meg and the rest. Gina wanted to say something but stopped. She looked at the high priest, and finally chose to remain silent. Meg saw everything. He looked at the high priest with a smile, and said, "High priest, now that we have established a cooperative relationship, it is not very convenient for me to come to Lanteast. Someone needs to deliver the medicine that allows your people to pass through the strong curse. Someone also needs to deliver the dried shark's fin and shark's lips that you have harvested. I wonder if you can send someone to stay in my restaurant permanently?" The high priest looked at Gina thoughtfully. He nodded with a smile, and said, "Of course. Princess Gina has been with Mr. Meg for a period of time. She is also the most powerful person among the younger generation in Lanteast. She will definitely be able to ensure the safety of the medicine and ingredients. I wonder if it is possible to arrange for her." Gina's eyes lit up. She looked at Meg nervously. She didn't know if Mr. Meg was still willing to let her stay. "If Miss Gina is willing, that would naturally be the best," Meg said with a smile as he looked at Gina. "I am willing." Gina almost blurted out with a happy smile on her face. Chapter 1094. The high priest looked at Gina, and sent a voice transmission. "Gina, assist Mr. Meg well. Don't call yourself a princess. He is Lanteast's benefactor. Millimeter. Gina nodded. How would she call herself a princess? As long as she could stay in the restaurant and beside Mr. Meg, she was willing to be a waitress in the restaurant. Looking at the smiling Meg, she felt as sweet as honey in her heart. So, Mr. Meg was willing to let her stay. Could it be that he has feelings for me, too? Mr. Meg, farewell." The high priest looked at Meg and nodded slightly at the people on the wooden boat. His gaze paused when it landed on Amy. He thought for a while, and took out a small blue crystal in the shape of a water droplet. He waved his hand gently, and the small crystal became a small bracelet with a red string. The high priest handed the bracelet to Amy with a smile, and said, This is a water-repellent bead. Young lady, you will be able to move freely underwater with it. This is a small gift. Take it as a meeting gift. What an adorable young lady. She is just like a little goddess from heaven. This is a great gift. Meg's eyes lit up, and he quickly got Amy to thank him. What a beautiful little bracelet. Thank you, Grandpa Merman, Amy said happily as she accepted the bracelet. Remi took the bracelet and said happily. She immediately put the bracelet on her hand and looked at the small water droplet against the sunlight. There was a small fish inside, and it seemed to be swimming in the sunlight. This bracelet that Grandpa Merman gave you can let you breathe underwater. Then, you will be like a fish, Meg said to Amy. Really? Then, won't I become a little fish? Will I also become a little mermaid? Amy's eyes lit up, and she asked curiously. Millimeterham, you can say that. Meg nodded with a smile. After waving goodbye to the high priest and the merfolk powerhouses, Meg turned to look at the dumbfounded ladies, and announced, Gina will continue to stay in the restaurant. Gina is not leaving. That's great. MIA exclaimed in surprise. Then, she hugged Gina, who had just transformed into a pair of legs, and stepped onto the wooden boat. Smiles appeared on everyone's faces. Sally and Shirley had left one after another, which made them feel rather sad. If Gina were to leave as well, then they would definitely be sad for a while longer. Thank you all, Gina said with a smile. She could feel everyone's love for her. This feeling moved her and made her happy. Meow Tilda Ugly Duckling suddenly popped its head out from the corner and called out to Gina. It licked its teeth as if it was quite happy, too. Oh. Gina was shocked and almost fell into the water from the side of the boat. Everyone burst into laughter. It was only noon, and Meg wasn't in a hurry to return. He took out the seafood that he had caught when he came up and started a new round of seafood party. After having a sumptuous seafood feast, Meg and the rest rested on the boat for a while. Just as they were about to return, the surface of the sea surged, and two mermaids came out of the water with a wooden box. They looked at Meg and respectfully said, Mr. Meg, the High Priest asked us to send a sample of the nether shark's fin and shark's lips. Do they meet your requirements? Meg took the wooden box and opened it. There was a set of crystal clear shark's fin and a fresh shark's lip between the crushed ice. The cut was very precise. Very good. Just cook according to this standard. Meg nodded with satisfaction. The merfolk were really efficient. He liked it. Ding. Congratulations, host. You have successfully found a suitable shark's fin and shark's lip supplier, and established a stable supply chain. You have taken an important step on the path to becoming the god of cookery. Mission reward calculation, 0, 5 strength points obtained. At this moment, the system's voice sounded in Meg's mind. Perfect. Meg's eyes lit up. With this 0, 5 strength point, he could officially advance to Grade 8. Grade 8 was a watershed level. Only when one's strength reached Grade 8 could he be considered a true high-level combat power. After a knight's strength reached Grade 8, he could cut a huge rock that was as thick as 3 people hugging it. His speed and explosive power were even stronger than a cheetah's. Coupled with his movement techniques, he could come and go without a trace. And for Meg, the most important thing was that he could finally use the real combat skills in his mind. A magician's domain, a knight's combat skills. These were the abilities that both obtained after entering the high level. Combat skills had already surpassed the category of martial skills. They also differed according to the individual knight, and there was an obvious differentiation. Some knights' combat skills obtained the ability to attack from a distance, such as a long-range blade attack. And some strengthened their combat skills, such as straight-faced smiley blade energy plus 49m . Alex's combat skills were more special. After all, there was no other knight as flashy as him in this world. He chose to strengthen his sword. It seemed simple and brainless, but it made the maneuverability of the sword extremely powerful. And because of that, he had also derived countless wonderful ways to use the sword. For example, flying swords. Of course, he didn't cultivate immortality. Instead, He used his terrifying control and combat skills to control the longsword, allowing his sword to obtain a certain flying sword effect. This method was a bit like darts, but more mysterious. Of course, he rarely used this method. And very few people knew about it. But it was indeed flashy. Forcefully suppressing the agitation in his heart, Meg indicated to the system that he wasn't in a hurry to transcend the tribulation. He smiled as he bade farewell to the two mermaids and closed the icebox. He would be able to officially make the first pot of Buddha jumps over the wall tomorrow if he brought the shark's fin and shark's lips back. Naturally, there was no reason to waste them. All right, we've been out for a day. It's time for us to go back. Meg stopped Amy, who was about to throw Ugly Duckling into the sea after tying the water-repelling pearl around its neck, and said to everyone with a smile, "Meow, meow, meow." Ugly Duckling reached out its two little paws and hugged Meg's arm as if it was grabbing onto its last life-saving straw. Its eyes were filled with fear. "It's okay, Ugly Duckling. With this water-repelling pearl, you can breathe in the water like a fish. You can only be considered a qualified duck after you learn how to swim." Amy pinched Ugly Duckling's fat face and said disdainfully, "Otherwise, what's the difference between you and a pig?" Meow. Ugly Duckling meowed aggrievedly. It looked at its fat tummy and didn't dare to say anything. "All right, let's swim again next time. We should go home." Meg saved Ugly Duckling with a smile. He understood Ugly Duckling's fear of the sea very well. Amy thought for a while, nodded, and softly murmured, "All right, then we'll swim again after we go back. The fountain in the square is pretty good." Meow. Ugly Duckling, who thought it had escaped a calamity, rolled its eyes and fainted in Meg's arms. Everyone packed their things and boarded the frost dragon that Elizabeth had transformed into to set off for home. They parked the wooden boat that was handmade by Phyllis on an isolated island nearby. They could still use it the next time they went out for a trip. "What an interesting day." Ma opened her arms and said happily. Chapter 1095. The night was getting darker. Rodu. The famous gourmet magazine, Hal Magazine, was still brightly lit at this moment. Under its banner were Food Forest, Carnivore, Vegetarianism, and many other best-selling magazines. It could be said to be the #1 magazine in the gourmet world. The chief editor, Gino, was pacing back and forth in his office. The sales results for this issue would be out very soon, and it would determine the fate of Hal Magazine. Under the many glorious halos, only Gino and a few editors from Hal knew that the magazine was facing a situation of layoffs and closure as the sales of a few top magazines dropped drastically. Although food was the most important thing to the people, Rodu's gourmet delicacies were almost all written out. Rodu was known as a gourmet paradise, but no matter how beautiful a paradise was, there would eventually come a time when one would get sick of it. When those beloved gourmets started to cook the same old dishes, and could no longer dig out gourmet delicacies from the streets and alleys, Hal Magazine would inevitably enter a downward phase. As the chief editor, Gino had thought of many ways before. He even requested those food critics who submitted articles to come up with something new in order for their articles to be published in the magazine. However, those articles that were barely pieced together or even fabricated did not increase the sales. Instead, it greatly damaged the reputation that the magazine had built up over the decades. The entire industry was facing a harsh winter, and Hal Magazine was feeling the extreme cold. Chief editor. Chief editor. At this moment, a young man pushed open the door of the office and rushed in directly. Gino was not bothered by the young man's recklessness. He quickly took 2 steps forward, looked at the young man nervously, and asked, "How is it? How are the sales of Food Forest and Carnivore?" These 2 magazines were Hal Magazine's trump cards. If these 2 magazines did not reach the financial group's target of 50,000 sales for the latest issue of the magazine in Rodu, Hal Magazine would transform into an adult-oriented magazine. He had been an editor at Hal for 30 years, and followed Hal step by step from an intern editor to the most influential gourmet magazine. How could he allow such a thing to happen? If this month's magazine could not reach the target, and he had no way to reverse the decision of the financial group behind the magazine, then it would be time for him to leave. Food Forest sold 12,000 copies, Carnivorous Doctrine sold 18,000 copies. The young man said while panting. 30,000. Is it still not enough to reach the target? Gino staggered 2 steps back with a disappointed expression. Although there was a significant increase compared to the previous month, there was still a huge gap between 30,000 volumes and the agreed-upon target of 50,000 volumes. When the magazine was at its peak, the sales volume of Carnivore Doctrine alone could reach 50,000 copies, which was the best in the industry. But now, it was impossible for a single book to sell more than 50,000 copies. He knew that people still loved food because it had been too long since there was a surprising food and text. Gino's gaze dimmed. He reached out and gently patted this young man who had just joined the job with a gourmet dream. He did not know how to comfort him. Perhaps from today onwards, he would be in charge of those pornographic magazines. Chief Editor, this issue of Vegetarianism has been reprinted 10 times. The sales volume in the Rodu market alone has exceeded 100,000 copies, and the distributors are still requesting for more copies. We have exceeded our target, the young man said agitatedly as he finally caught his breath. Gino, who had decided to say something, was stunned by the young editor's words before he could even open his mouth. What did you say? Gino said in disbelief as he grabbed the young editor's shoulders. Although Vegetarianism was also one of HAL's well-known magazines, its sales volume was only 10,000 copies at its peak due to its small audience. Now, it was all supported by the head vegetarian gourmet, Derek. The sales volume of the new issue every month was stable at around 5,000 copies. How could it suddenly soar to 100,000 copies? That young editor repeated again. The sales volume of the latest issue of Vegetarianism has exploded. The sales volume in the Rodu market has already reached 100,000 copies, and the distributors are still urging for more copies. The total sales volume is estimated to reach 150,000 copies, or, even more, 150,000 copies, Gino murmured as he sat down on the sofa behind him. His expression was still a little dazed. When HL was at its peak, the monthly sales volume of Carnivorous Doctrine in the Rodu market was 72,000 copies. It left a deep mark in the history of gourmet magazines, and was almost set as the peak that could never be surpassed. But now, the niche Vegetarianism had already reached 100,000 copies, and it wasn't over yet. It might even reach a terrifying 150,000 copies. Is this crazy? Gino muttered to himself. No one would dare to lie about such things. This data was definitely correct. Vegetarianism was definitely going to be the sales champion this month, and it would definitely be the peak that caught the attention of the entire industry. It's crazy. That young editor was also agitated. When he first received this report, he wasn't any better than the chief editor was now. The printing factory is already reprinting day and night, but there's still no way to meet the supply. There are even readers who directly shouted that it's fine even if they only print Derek's gourmet review. Chief Editor, what should we do now? Derek. Gino's eyes lit up. He stood up and flipped through the pile of manuscripts on the table. He pulled out a sample manuscript from the bottom, and it was signed by Derek. In order to go all out to increase the sales volume, he had put all his energy into the top 2 magazines this month. The other magazines were finalized by the few deputy chief editors. The final draft of Vegetarianism had also been sent to his desk before, but he had ignored it. The Best Vegetarian Dish of the Year, a work that reinvigorates one's worldview. An Unexpected Harvest from Chaos City, Eggplant with Garlic. Gino read the main and subtitles softly, and his eyes were filled with surprise. He and Derek were old friends, and he was most familiar with Derek's low-profile character and strict and simple writing style. He didn't expect him to use such a title that didn't suit his usual style. Chaos City also has delicacies? Gino muttered to himself before continuing to read. I've been invited by the president of Chaos City's Food Association to head to Chaos City. As he continued reading those familiar and simple words, Gino's expression gradually lit up. Those words seemed to have some kind of magical power. A delicious eggplant with garlic seemed to really appear before him. Then, As Derek picked up a piece of eggplant and put it into his mouth. Chapter 1096. Gulp. When Gino put down the manuscript in his hand, he couldn't help but swallow his saliva. As a senior food editor who had been in the industry for 30 years, he hadn't been moved by words describing delicacies for a long time. But today, after reading Derek's article, a strong desire arose in him. He wanted to taste the eggplant with garlic sauce himself and see if it was really as delicious and tempting as Derek had described. Even a table full of sumptuous meat dishes was not worth mentioning in front of the eggplant with garlic sauce. These are words with soul, a real food review article, Gino praised. Gino praised before grabbing a handful of his hair in frustration. Why didn't I discover such a good article earlier? If I had discovered it earlier and carried out the publicity in advance, the sales might have increased by a lot. Isn't that so? The first printing of Vegetarianism was only 5,000 copies, and it gradually became popular because of word of mouth from the readers. There was almost no publicity at all. This is simply a miracle in the history of magazines, the young editor said with a nod. Gino closed the manuscript in his hand, and said with a determined gaze, since our own printing company can't keep up with the progress, then find another 2 printing companies to start work at the same time and print this issue of Vegetarianism. We have to continue the miracle of this food magazine and let the entire industry see hope. All right, the young editor replied. He placed the report on the table and left the office quickly. Derek and this mammoth are simply Hal's saviors. After I'm done here, I have to thank them personally, Gino said with a smile. He picked up the report on the table and looked at it seriously for a while. Then, he took the report and a folder and left the chief editor's office quickly. Rodu, the palace. A resplendent palace. The pink and gold colors were almost proportional, making the entire palace look very pink and adorable. A young girl dressed in luxurious clothes was lying on the bed, reading the latest issue of Vegetarianism with great interest. After a long time, she put down the magazine in her hand. Hearing her stomach growling, a pained expression appeared on her exquisite face. She turned over and pressed the magazine against her stomach. With a look of despair, she said, "Oh my God. Why did you make me read this in the middle of the night? It's already the 36th time, but why am I still so hungry after watching it? Princess Vanessa, it's time for you to go to bed." The young maid standing beside the bed said with a smile. Princess Vanessa sat up on the bed and looked at the maid with a worried expression. "Laura, I want to eat something. The Queen has instructed that you cannot eat anything before you sleep." Laura looked at the princess who was lying on the bed and shook her head helplessly. "Can I just have one piece of candy? Just a small piece will do." Vanessa stretched out her little finger. "The Queen said that you can't eat sweets until your teeth are healed." Laura shook her head. She looked at the black hole in Princess Vanessa's teeth and felt her heart ache. Princess Vanessa was the king's only daughter. She had inherited the Queen's beauty and was already a little beauty at the age of 16. However, her teeth had a lot of decay because she often ate sweets before she slept. It was fine if she didn't show her teeth, but when she smiled, her mouth was full of rotten teeth like that of a 70 or 80-year-old woman, completely ruining her temperament. Magic casters had a way to repair her teeth, but the treatment was too long. Furthermore, Princess Vanessa often ate sweets, so the treatment was very mediocre. Because of this, Princess Vanessa didn't attend any public gatherings since she was 14 years old. She locked herself in her bedroom every day. Occasionally, she would go to the manor in the suburbs for vacation, but only had one maid, Laura, to serve her. Over the years, her greatest interest was reading all kinds of gourmet magazines. The king doted on her, and as long as she wanted to eat something, he would invite a chef to the palace to cook it for her. The Queen had already given Laura an order. She had to keep an eye on the princess and stop her from eating sweets. Otherwise, she would be severely punished. Vanessa stared at Laura for a while before lying back on the bed. She knew about the Queen's order. She couldn't bear to see Laura being punished because of her. "Laura, do you think that eggplant with garlic sauce is really that delicious?" I've been dreaming about it for the past few days. I really want to go to Chaos City to try it for myself. Vanessa lay on the bed and looked at the ceiling that was inlaid with luminous pearls that emitted soft light. It must be very delicious if it can make the princess miss it so much. Laura smiled and said, I heard that Mr. Meg won the title of the best chef during the king's birthday celebration. Every dish he made was highly praised by the king. I regret it so much. Why did I go to the suburbs for a vacation those few days? I feel like I missed out on a delicious feast. Vanessa kicked her legs with a despondent look on her face. Laura covered her with the blanket carefully and smilingly said, if the princess really wants to eat it, you just have to tell His Majesty, and he will definitely invite Mr. Meg over from Rodu to make you a delicious eggplant with garlic sauce. Really? Vanessa's eyes lit up, and a smile appeared on her face. All right, then I'll go look for His Majesty tomorrow, and ask him to invite Mr. Meg to the palace. Meg finally coaxed the two little ones to sleep. He tiptoed out of the room and walked to the balcony. He had a bountiful trip to the sea today. Not only did he obtain an army, but he also obtained a strength point as a reward. The opportunity to break through to the 8th tier was right in front of him. Meg was obviously not someone who could keep his cool. He went to the balcony and closed the door carefully. After that, Meg took off his bathrobe and put it aside. He walked to the center of the balcony and heaved a sigh of relief. Then, he opened his arms and said in his heart, System, I'm ready. We can begin. Boom. An explosion suddenly erupted in the sky. 8 bolts of lightning twisted together to form a lightning pillar and fell on Meg's head. The lightning illuminated the balcony, and Meg, who was only wearing a pair of shorts, was bathed in the lightning. His muscles and bones seemed to have become transparent and were being torn apart and reconstructed in a frenzy under the lightning. 3 minutes later, the lightning finally dissipated. Meg, who felt as if a century had passed, suddenly opened his eyes. He clenched his fists and could feel a special internal force flowing through his body. He could easily control it with his mind. Is this what it feels like to break through to the 8th tier? A smile appeared on Meg's face. It was a familiar yet unfamiliar feeling. Chapter 1097. Harold opened his eyes as he heard the loud crow of a rooster. He instinctively turned his head to look at the magic clock hanging on the opposite side of the bed. It was already 6:30 am. Shit. I'm going to be late. Harold's sleepiness disappeared instantly, and he got out of bed. He pulled his pajamas off, picked up the clothes beside the bed, and put them on. Doris was woken up by the rustling sound. She rubbed her sleepy eyes as she sat up. She looked at Harold, who was almost fully dressed, and asked in confusion, Harold, what are you doing? Isn't it your day off today? Day off? Harold, who was about to walk out of the door, paused. He smacked his head and laughed awkwardly. I drank too much yesterday. I forgot that it's my day off today. Doris, I'm sorry to wake you up so early. It's all right. You've been too tired recently. I should have reminded you last night. Doris stood up and hugged Harold gently. Her slender fingers massaged his temples gently, and her heart ached for him. Harold closed his eyes and enjoyed his wife's shiatsu massage to ease the headache caused by his hangover. He was the sales director of a furniture company. Because the sales target for the second half of the year did not meet the requirements, he had to go to the office at 6 a.m. almost every day for the past few months. He would drink with his clients until late at night before returning home. Although his income was not low, the high-intensity work and pressure also made him mentally and physically exhausted. Fortunately, he had finally settled the deal with the big client last night. The sales target for the second half of the year was also achieved in advance because of this deal. He could relax a little now. The warm fingertips massaged his forehead gently. It was so comfortable that Harold wanted to lie down again and go back to sleep. Since you're already up, let's go out for breakfast, Doris said gently. Breakfast? Harold opened his eyes and yawned. He shook his head and said, I don't have an appetite now. I just want to have a good sleep. Besides, You know that I never eat breakfast. Doris looked into Harold's eyes and said gently, you promised Kathy to take her out for good food. You've been too busy with work these few months. She mentioned it to me a few times, but I didn't tell you. Harold looked at Doris and suddenly realized that he had been busy with work and neglected his family for the past few months. She had to take care of the entire family alone, and she also had to take care of the children. She definitely had it no easier than him. He suddenly felt a little guilty. I'm afraid there's nothing good for breakfast. Why don't we go out for lunch and dinner? Harold grabbed Doris' hand and placed it gently on his face. He said gently, I haven't had a meal with you in a long time. Let's go to Duca's restaurant. That was the place where they pledged their love. Every year on that day, they would go together as a family. But this year, because he was too busy with work, he didn't bring her along. I promised Kathy that I would take her to Aiden Square this morning. Doris shook her head slightly. She looked at Harold worriedly and said, the doctor said your gastric problem can't be ignored anymore. If you don't eat breakfast, it will continue to worsen. I heard there's a restaurant called Mammy in the square that's not bad. Let's go and try it. Harold didn't care about his gastric problem. He could endure the occasional pain, and it had nothing to do with breakfast. His mouth was dry now, and his head was a little dizzy. He was resisting breakfast from head to toe. However, looking at Doris's expression, he couldn't bear to reject her. He nodded with a smile and said, all right. Let's pack up and get ready to go out. Soon, the family of 3 went out. The little girl, who was 7 or 8 years old, held the hands of the 2 adults. Dr. Matthew, are you back from your morning exercise so early? The family met an old man who was doing morning exercise as soon as they stepped out of the door. Harold greeted him with a smile. This was their neighbor, a famous doctor in Chaos City. Dr. Matthew stopped in his tracks and said to Harold with a frown, Harold, you don't look too good. Did you drink a lot last night? Harold glanced at Doris and shook his head with a smile. I did drink a little last night, but it should be because I've been too tired recently. It's nothing. Dr. Matthew, please take a look at him. He vomited when he came back last night. There was blood in his vomit, Doris said worriedly. Kathy, who had her hair tied up in a ponytail, also looked at Dr. Matthew and pleaded, Grandpa Matthew, please take a look at Father. Dr. Matthew stared at Harold for a while and solemnly said, Harold, although you are still young, your stomach is already worse than an old man like me. Come to my clinic later. From today onwards, you can't drink anymore. Otherwise, I'm afraid you won't be able to last much longer. All right, I will come, Harold replied with a smile. After that, he brought Doris and Kathy onto the horse-drawn carriage. Although Dr. Matthew is a good man, he still likes to use the doctor's way of scaring people, Harold consoled himself. Harold comforted himself in his heart. However, looking at his wife and daughter sitting opposite him, his heart was still clouded with a layer of haze. Go to Amy's, Harold said to the coachman. Today's new item, soy milk and youtiao set meal. Breakfast special. It was written on the wooden sign at the entrance of Amy's this morning. What's soy milk? What's youtiao? It's actually only available for breakfast. Could the soy milk and youtiao be connected? No matter what it is, Mr. Mac has finally developed the first authentic breakfast set meal. Although it was still early, there was already a long line at the entrance. The customers were guessing curiously when they saw the sign. Harold's horse-drawn carriage stopped outside Amy's. He lifted the curtain and saw the long line at the entrance of the restaurant. He couldn't help but click his tongue. It's not even 7 a.m. Why are there so many people queuing? I heard that this restaurant is ranked first in the new delicious cuisine rankings. It's very popular. I didn't expect there to be so many people. Doris was also surprised. Although she was mentally prepared before she came, she didn't expect there to be so many customers. Kathy's eyes lit up. She looked up at Harold and said, My classmate said that the ice cream in this restaurant is super delicious. Father, can I have an ice cream? Of course, Kathy, if you want to, Harold said with a smile. Although he didn't like queuing early in the morning, he didn't find it too difficult to accept since Kathy liked it. After all, his mission today was to accompany them for the day. Harold's family lined up in the line. He listened to the customers in 2 lines arguing about the sweetness and saltiness of the tofu pudding. Most of his attention was still on the new item released today. It's quite an interesting restaurant. His keen sense of sales made him feel that this restaurant wasn't ordinary. However, he still didn't want to eat breakfast. A glass of water was better than anything else. The restaurant opened for business. The customers filed in an orderly manner. Harold was a little surprised that the interior of this restaurant that suddenly appeared in the corner of the square was so exquisite and elegant. After he sat down, he didn't even bother to open the menu. He said to the waiter, "I want a copy of your new breakfast set meal." Chapter 1098. It's a serious gastric ulcer with bleeding points. It's showing signs of developing into stomach cancer. In the kitchen, Meg glanced at Harold in surprise. This young man who looked like he was in his early 30s already had such a serious gastric problem. If it wasn't treated properly, it would be a tragedy in no time. Meg sighed in his heart. Young people had to maintain their health. Otherwise, their bodies would be worse than those of centenarians. "All right, Madam and Cutie. What would you like to order?" Yarbemia asked Doris and Kathy with a smile. "I'd like a youtiao and soy milk set meal, too." Doris smiled elegantly. Then, she placed the menu in Kathy's direction. "Kathy, you can order whatever you want." "I'd like an ice cream," Kathy said without hesitation. Mia shook her head slightly, and said, "Ice cream is cold. It's not legal to eat it after waking up. It'll hurt your stomach. If Cutie wants to eat it, you can eat something else to fill your stomach first." Hurt your stomach? Harold felt his nerves being stirred. He looked at Kathy, and said, "Kathy, let's eat something else first." Then, "I'd like the same as father and mother," Kathy said after thinking for a while. Then, she quickly added, "and a strawberry ice cream." "All right." Mia nodded. Then, she asked, "There are 2 flavors of soy milk, sweet and savory. Which one would you like?" "Sweet and savory?" Harold seemed to be in deep thought. "Sweet tofu pudding is the way to go. Then, sweet soy milk must be something super delicious, right? Savory tofu pudding is the orthodox one. I'd like to choose savory soy milk." The customers at the side had already started arguing about the flavor of soy milk. Although they were all speaking softly, they didn't seem to want to give in. "I'd like a sweet soy milk with less sugar," Harold said. Then, he looked at Doris. "Do you want the savory one?" "Yes, I'd like a savory soy milk." Doris nodded with a smile in her eyes. Although they hadn't eaten together for a long time, Harold still remembered her preferences. "I want it sweet, the kind with super polysaccharide." Kathy raised her small hand. "All right, please wait a moment." Yarbemia nodded slightly before looking at Harrison, who was sharing a table with Harold's family. "Miss Mia, isn't there a purchase limit for soy milk?" Before Yarbemia could say anything, Harrison spoke first. The soy milk on the menu looked a little like tofu pudding. "Yes, there's no limit to the purchase of soy milk. You can order as many as you want." "All right, then I'll have 2 youtiao and soy milk sets, 1 sweet, 1 savory, and 1 sweet tofu pudding. Although I'm a fan of sweet tofu pudding, I still have to be brave enough to try it," Harrison said with a smile. "All right, please wait a moment." Yarbemia smiled and turned to leave. Harold looked around without batting an eyelid. As a salesman, it was inevitable for him to socialize. He had some understanding of the restaurants in the Aden Square, but he didn't expect there to be such a unique restaurant. The elves and demons were sitting together at the same table, while the goblins and dwarfs were sitting together harmoniously. This was a scene that couldn't be seen anywhere else. They're queuing up so early in the morning just for breakfast. These people are so free, Harold thought to himself. Usually, he would be having a morning meeting in the company at this time. "Your soy milk and youtiao set." Not long after, Yarbemia served the family of 3's soy milk and youtiao, and placed them in front of them gently. "This is soy milk and youtiao." Harold looked at the two golden, oily things on the plate in front of him. A crispy aroma wafted over. Although it looked a little oily, it didn't feel too greasy. Then, he looked at the bowl of steaming white soup in the white porcelain bowl at the side. This should be the so-called soy milk. It looked a little similar to rice soup, and had a faint bean aroma. There was nothing special about it. 300 copper coins for a set. It doesn't seem like much, Harold thought to himself. It wasn't as appetizing as the beef head noodles at the noodle shop next door that cost 30 copper coins a bowl. Wow, it's so chubby. This youtiao looks so cute. Kathy had already reached out to grab a youtiao. She looked at it before opening her mouth wide and taking a big bite. Crunch. A crisp sound rang out. Kathy's eyes lit up instantly. She chewed, and the more she chewed, the more fragrant it became. A blissful expression appeared on her face. "This youtiao is so soft and crispy. It's so delicious," Kathy said in surprise after swallowing it in one bite. Then, she quickly took a big bite of the youtiao. This was much better than the bread she had every morning. "Eat slowly," Doris reminded with a smile. Then, she picked up the soup spoon. The savory soy milk in front of her seemed to have some kind of sauce added to it compared to the sweet soy milk. There were even some chopped green onions floating on top. She stirred it gently with the soup spoon. There were also some seaweed and small shrimps inside. The savory aroma mixed with the bean aroma wafted to her face together with the heat. Her eyes lit up, and she scooped up a spoonful of soy milk and put it into her mouth gracefully. The sauce aroma, savory aroma, and freshness of the shrimps were perfectly blended together by the soy milk. Then, it bloomed in her mouth at the same time. Her taste buds that had no appetite in the morning were immediately stimulated. The bean aroma was so rich, and the savory aroma was just right. It slid down her throat, and the warm soy milk turned into a warm current that flowed all the way to her stomach. It was so warm that she felt her whole body being warmed up. Unbelievably delicious. Doris couldn't help but exclaim. She looked up at Harold, and urged him, "You should try it too." "Is it really that delicious?" Harold didn't quite believe it. He scooped up a spoonful of soy milk, and the steam rose up. He put it to his mouth and blew on it before putting it into his mouth. Once the warm soy milk entered his mouth, it was like rain after a long drought. It moistened his dry lips and moistened his slightly sour mouth. The sweet bean aroma started to spread, washing away the sourness. His tired taste buds were like grass that was moistened by the spring rain. They started to wake up gradually. The sweetness wasn't overpowering, and the bean aroma was even more refreshing. The warm soy milk slid down his throat slowly. His throat that was sore from vomiting and hangover last night seemed to be comforted and moisturized by a gentle hand. The dry and painful feeling disappeared magically. The warmth slid into his stomach and chased away all the sourness. The warm feeling lingered in his stomach, and the discomfort in his stomach was significantly alleviated. What a wonderful feeling! After drinking a mouthful of soy milk, Harold actually felt his whole body become much more transparent. It was as if he had come back to life. He couldn't help but put another spoonful of soy milk into his mouth. He closed his eyes and enjoyed the wonderful feeling of being moisturized. Then, he opened his eyes and picked up a youtiao with his chopsticks to take a bite. "Smells so good." Chapter 1099. Crunch. The youtiao let out a crisp sound when he bit into it lightly. The golden and swollen youtiao was actually fluffy and hollow inside. The more he chewed, the more fragrant it became. It did not feel greasy at all. This reminded Harold of the small crepes his mother liked to make when he was young. The thin crepes were also crispy and delicious after being fried in the oil. However, he had not tasted it for more than 10 years, and he would not have the chance to in the future, either. He swallowed the crispy youtiao and had a mouthful of soy milk. It was a perfect match. This steaming hot breakfast had already made him forget his disdain for breakfast earlier. He only felt a warmth in his stomach after eating the youtiao and soy milk. The discomfort in his stomach caused by drinking too much last night was completely gone after eating the youtiao and half a bowl of soy milk. What a wonderful combination. What a wonderful breakfast. Looks like I have to come for breakfast in the future, Harold thought to himself. Harold thought to himself that he could consider coming over for breakfast before going to work when he resumed work at 8 a.m. He had to admit that Dr. Matthew's words in the morning still had some effect on him. Kathy was so young, and Doris had been a full-time housewife for many years. If he, the pillar of the family, collapsed, then they would not have anyone to rely on. He did not want to take medicine, but he wanted to eat some breakfast every day. This soy milk and youtiao set meal seemed to be a good choice. Harrison, who had been swallowing his saliva for a while, also ordered 2 sets of meals. Wow, they both look very tempting. Which one should I eat first? Harrison had a conflicted expression on his face. At this moment, Meg walked out of the kitchen with a kitchen knife, and reminded them with a smile, "Oh, right. Customers who ordered the savory soy milk set meal, perhaps you can try soaking a small piece of youtiao in the soy milk. Perhaps you will get an extra delicious taste. Mr. Mac, why didn't you say so earlier? We're all done. I have no choice but to order another set. This savory soy milk with youtiao is simply addictive. The sweet soy milk is surprisingly delicious. The soy milk should be sweet, and the tofu pudding should be salty. This is the right combination." The restaurant suddenly became lively. The customers who ate quickly could only order another serving, not wanting to miss the special delicacy in Meg's mouth. Harrison, who was debating which set meal to eat first, saw the savory soy milk on the right. Without thinking, he picked up a youtiao, broke it into small pieces, and put it into the savory soy milk. He carefully submerged it with a spoon. After a while, he scooped up a spoonful of savory soy milk and put it into his mouth. The savory soy milk was especially refreshing. The fresh aroma of the small shrimps blended perfectly with the fragrance of the sauce. A little chopped green onion made the savory soy milk even more delicious and refreshing. There's nothing better than waking up early in the morning to drink such delicious soy milk. Harrison couldn't help but exclaim. Then, he picked up a youtiao and took a bite. The crispy texture and the rich aroma of the deep-fried noodles became more and more intense as he chewed. The texture was not as hard as ordinary fried noodles. Instead, it was crispy and delicious. Moreover, the interior was hollow, which made the texture very special. This youtiao is the pinnacle of the deep-fried world. It's clearly sealed from the outside. How did Mr. Mac make the youtiao hollow? It's incredible. Harrison took a few bites of the youtiao, and was full of praise again. Now, let me try the savory soy milk soaked in the youtiao. Harrison put down the youtiao in his hand, and excitedly scooped up a section of youtiao soaked in the savory soy milk with a spoon. He put it into his mouth along with half a spoonful of soy milk. The crispy youtiao became soft after soaking in the savory soy milk. It absorbed the savory soy milk and had a special texture and taste when chewed. It was salty and refreshing with the crispness of the youtiao. The combination of the two really burst out an incredible delicacy. 1 set meal, 3 ways to eat it. Mr. Mac is indeed a genius. Harrison murmured to himself as he ate happily. Soon, he finished the savory soy milk set meal. His eyes fell on the sweet soy milk set meal. The savory soy milk brought him a huge surprise. It made him look forward to the savory soy milk a little less. He scooped up a spoonful of the sweet soy milk and put it into his mouth. The sweet savory soy milk was quite refreshing. However, he felt a little bland when he drank the savory soy milk right after he had the savory soy milk. It did not have the strong impact that the savory soy milk had before. However, it could be considered a delicious breakfast combination with the youtiao. Although the sweet soy milk is not bad, I've decided to stand on the savory soy milk side this time. Savory soy milk, sweet tofu pudding. Harrison touched his stomach in satisfaction after finishing the 2 sets very quickly. Compared to the braised chicken and rice and Yangju fried rice, this professional breakfast was indeed more refreshing after finishing it. Harold also finished his breakfast. The amount was just right for him. He did not feel too full, but the warmth that was still spreading from his stomach made him feel very comfortable all over. Harold glanced in the direction of the kitchen with a smile, and said to Doris, "This boss must have extraordinary culinary skills to be able to make so many customers line up. Since my stomach feels better after breakfast, I'll come here every day for breakfast." Harold glanced in the direction of the kitchen, and smiled at Doris. Doris was elated. She nodded, and said, "Great. That's great." She had tried to persuade Harold for many years to have breakfast. She did not expect him to decide to have breakfast after eating the youtiao and soy milk set meal today. Bringing Mamis today was indeed the right choice. Kathy also put down her spoon, and said to Harold, "I've finished the soy milk and youtiao. Father, can I have the ice cream now?" "Of course." Harold nodded. He raised his hand to signal the waiter to order the ice cream that Kathy had been craving for a long time. Harold and Doris also smiled when they saw the little one licking the ice cream happily. It had been a long time since their family came out to eat together like this. The soy milk and youtiao set meal received a good response. However, there seemed to be another debate about whether to drink the soy milk sweet or savory. Meg chose to ignore it. The customers who ate the soy milk and youtiao set meal this morning all had different degrees of relief for their stomachs. It seems like the soy milk and youtiao have good relief and healing effects for the stomach. Meg was deep in thought in the kitchen. He had observed carefully before, and deduced the effect of the new product by comparing the differences in the customers' body data when they entered and left the restaurant. This was clearly another new product. I wonder what effect Buddha jumps over the wall will have. Meg thought as he looked at the pot that was boiling on the stove. Chapter 1100. Father, what's cooking in your pot? Is it a new dish? Amy asked curiously as she came back from school at noon. She stood at the kitchen door and looked at the big pot with a lid. Phyllis and Anna were also looking at Meg curiously. Meg had been boiling something with the lid closed since this morning. They didn't see him lift the lid at all. This is a pot of thick soup. It's the soup base for the new dish. As for the new dish, you can only eat it at night, Meg said with a smile. Buddha jumps over the wall was a very complicated dish. In order to make a pure and delicious Buddha jumps over the wall, every step had to be done carefully. Furthermore, this was after the system had upgraded and improved it. With the help of some high-tech kitchen utensils, he was able to make a pot of Buddha jumps over the wall in a day. According to the normal process, it was impossible to make it without a few days. Is it made with the shark's fin that you brought back yesterday? Amy asked again. Yes, but that's only one of the ingredients. Meg nodded. He looked at the watch, turned off the fire, and opened the lid to take a look. The thick soup was ready. Then, he took out the shark's fin and shark's lips that he had dried overnight and put them into the steamer to steam. The ingredients had to be processed one by one. Did you learn any interesting magic from your teacher today? Meg asked with a smile as he put the ingredients away and turned to look at Amy. Yes. Master Julian taught me teleportation magic today. Amy nodded. She took out her magic wand and turned it into a magic wand. Then, she drew a circle on the ground. An icy blue light rose, and a chill spread out. With a flash of light, Amy disappeared. Where did Amy go? Anna blinked and looked at the remaining ice chips on the ground. The icy blue light lit up again. When the light faded, Amy appeared again. She was holding a music box in her hands. She said with a smile, "Look, in this way, I don't have to climb the stairs to go upstairs. That's pretty good." Meg's mouth twitched. He wondered what Julian's expression would be if he knew that the teleportation magic that he had painstakingly taught Amy was only used to go up and down the stairs. Amy is so awesome, Anna exclaimed as she clapped her little hands. Big sister Anna, let's learn how to dance. I found a very interesting dance yesterday. One person can make many hands. It's very beautiful, Amy said as she waved the music box in her hands. Really? Then I want to see it too. Anna's eyes lit up, and she immediately followed Remi out of the kitchen. Mia and the others didn't have anything to do now, so they all went over it. Moreover, what made them even more concerned was that REMI said that in half a month, the restaurant would be holding a major festival called New Year. According to tradition, they would need to perform, so naturally, everyone wanted to learn. A one-person thousand-hand guanine? Mag took a look at the little elf who was performing, and raised his eyebrows. This kind of thing could only be done in the fantasy world, but not everyone could perform it. Father, the soy milk and youtiao this morning are so delicious. Amy wants more, Amy said to Meg expectantly after playing for a while. If Amy wants more, I'll make more for you tomorrow morning. Because I have to make a lot of preparations, I won't be able to eat it this afternoon, Meg said with a smile. All right. Amy can eat it tomorrow morning. Amy nodded. She pinched Ugly Duckling's chubby face. Stop looking. If I can't eat it, you won't be able to eat it either. Meow tilde Ugly Duckling meowed aggrievedly and shrank its head back in. All right, let's eat. Mag said as he walked out of the kitchen with the last dish. He looked at the girls who were watching the dancing figures on the music box. Go wash your hands first, Meg said to Amy, who was about to sit on the chair. Oh tilde Amy responded obediently. She took a stool from the side and went to the kitchen to sit on it. Then, she turned on the tap and washed her hands. Everyone sat down and started eating. Father, I heard that the friends we used to play with in the square have moved to their new home. Can we go and play with them? Amy asked Meg as soon as she sat down at the dining table. Of course. But Amy has to study magic during the day, and Father has to cook in the restaurant at night. We can't make time. Why don't we go on the next day off? Meg said after some thought. It seemed that the foundation was quite fast. If they let the children stay outside in this harsh winter, many of them might not survive. All right. Amy nodded. She picked up a piece of chicken with her chopsticks and placed it in Meg's bowl. Thank you for your hard work, Father. You have to eat more chicken. Meg placed a piece of spicy grilled fish into Amy's bowl with a smile, and said, Amy, eat more fish too. You'll become smarter after eating fish. No way. All big fish that can be caught are big idiots. Amy looked at the grilled fish and shook her head with an earnest expression. Meg. Amy placed a piece of fish into her mouth and chewed before swallowing. A smile appeared on her face as she said, but big idiot fish is delicious. Then eat more. Meg placed another large piece of fish into her bowl. He didn't know what to say. After lunch, it was time for the restaurant to open for business. Seeing as Phyllis was likely to leave soon, Meg was going to recruit another chef who could take on the responsibility of preparing ingredients. Even though Yabemia's knife skills were quite good, she was already very busy with both the restaurant and the ice cream shop. He really couldn't bear to let her take on the responsibility of preparing ingredients. As for the others, it didn't seem like they were suitable for the job. After a busy lunch, Meg placed a deck chair in front of the restaurant and prepared to take a nap under the warm winter sun. However, just as he closed his eyes, a dark shadow blocked out the sunlight. Meg opened his eyes to find a pair of round car headlights. Why does this look a little familiar? Meg faltered slightly before looking up. He saw Countess Camilla looking down at him with a cold smile on her face. Do I look good? This sun is really round. Meg replied casually. Take a good look. You might not be able to see the sun tomorrow. Camilla's seductive eyes narrowed slightly as she leaned closer to Meg, as if she were going to press him down onto the deck chair. Of course not. The sun will still rise tomorrow, but it won't be as round as today. Meg smiled. He could guess the Countess' intentions. Aren't you afraid of death? Death? Of course I'm afraid of death. However, would you dare to kill someone in broad daylight? Mag smiled as he took out an aquablue crystal from his pocket. I used a photostone to record what happened that day. Do you want to watch it together with me, Countess? Wonderful book house. Chapter 1101. WH. What? Camilla's expression instantly froze as she looked at the blue crystal in Meg's hand. This was indeed an image recording stone. This guy was actually so shameless. Did he record everything that happened that day in this image recording stone? Thinking back to that day when she was tied up shamefully and couldn't control her voice under his whip, the most despicable thing was that in the end, a woman who came out of nowhere slapped her with a chair and hung on the wall. If this kind of content were to spread, her reputation as the Countess of Bartoli would be completely ruined. How could there be any beautiful girls who would be deeply in love with her in the future? If Miss Gloria knew that she might be a masochist, that would be even worse. No. This kind of thing definitely can't happen. Camilla's gaze turned cold as she looked at Meg's neck with a trace of murderous intent in her eyes. There is more than one image recording stone. I left one with a friend. If I die, he will take the image recording stone out for auction. I think it should be able to sell for a good price. Meg looked at Camilla and grinned. Isn't that right, Countess? Camilla forcefully resisted the urge to suck Meg's blood dry. She didn't think that this seemingly decent guy would be so cunning. Humans are indeed the most despicable and shameless. Camilla said coldly. I only want to be safe. If Countess doesn't use any silly methods like stalking, hitting, or kidnapping, I can guarantee that no one else will know about this image recording stone. Meg shrugged with a harmless smile on his face. You. Camilla was so angry that her entire body trembled, but she couldn't do anything. She was the Countess of Bartoli, but she was actually being played and threatened by a human chef. She couldn't accept this. Meg looked at the pair of soft breasts that swayed with their owner and blinked. The sun was still a bit dazzling. Mr. Meg, Countess Bartoli. What are you doing? At this moment, a surprised voice sounded from behind them. Gloria, who had just come down from the carriage, saw the scene in front of the restaurant and covered her mouth with her hand. Meg was lying on the deck chair while Camilla was on top of him, almost completely pressing him under her body. The distance between their faces was no more than 10 centimeters. Such a charming and gentle scene actually happened in broad daylight, and it gave her a huge impact. Camilla's expression froze again. Although she didn't turn her head, she could already tell that it was Gloria's voice. Her gaze swept downwards, and a trace of redness appeared on her pale face. She didn't think that in her excitement just now, she was in such an embarrassing position with Meg. What was even more unexpected was that Miss Gloria actually appeared at this time. Hesitation flashed across her eyes as she looked at the photostone in Meg's hand. If he gave this photostone to Miss Gloria, then she would be sentenced to death. Countess, if you really want to be a waitress in the restaurant, you don't have to do this. As long as your ability is good enough, I'll welcome you to the restaurant. Meg changed the topic and said seriously, Camilla, when did I say that I want to be a waitress? Also, you're using seduction to become a waitress? You shameless bastard. Camilla's eyes gradually widened. She wanted to use her sharp nails to cut open Meg's chest and dig out his heart to eat. I've changed my mind. If you want to take back all the photostones, then agree to my conditions. Meg's voice suddenly lowered as he looked at Camilla and smiled. Bastard. You actually want me to be a waitress? Camilla felt that she was about to explode in anger. However, when she thought that her embarrassing appearance might be publicized, she could only grit her teeth and stand up from Meg's body. She looked at Meg arrogantly. It's your honor that I can come to your restaurant. You should bow down and welcome me. So it's just an interview? Gloria was stunned when she heard the conversation between the two. Meg ignored Camilla's pretentious queenly attitude and turned to look at Gloria. He was a little surprised. Miss Gloria, why are you here? Camilla also seemed to have just noticed Gloria. She gently tugged at her clothes and looked at her with a charming smile. She said gently, My dear Miss Gloria, long time no see. How are you? Greetings, Countess. Gloria bowed slightly, but there was a trace of caution in her eyes when she looked at Camilla. Yesterday, her grandfather called her alone and told her to keep a distance and be vigilant with this countess. The strange things that happened around her before might have been caused by her. When she looked at Meg, there was a bit of joy in her eyes. She took 2 steps forward with a smile and said, "I have something to discuss with Mr. Meg, so I came abruptly." "Oh, it's okay. I have nothing to do now anyway." Meg sat up from the recliner and looked at Camilla again. He smiled and said, "Countess, you don't mind, right?" Gloria's different attitude had already made Camilla a little sad. Meg's appearance of wanting to throw the bad guy to her made her feel even more displeased. However, she had to put on a smile and shook her head slightly. "Miss Gloria, if you have something to talk about, you can talk about it. I naturally don't mind. Then please leave us for a moment." Meg pointed to the side and said with a smile, "I." Camilla gritted her teeth. When she saw Gloria turn her head, she forced a smile and said, "Okay, you two talk first." After saying that, she walked to the side and gave Meg and Gloria the space. "This guy, I'm going to suck his blood dry sooner or later." Camilla clenched her fists and thought to herself. After so many years, she had never been so aggrieved like today. "Miss Gloria, please sit here." Meg stood up and led Gloria to a seat on the side. After she sat down, he sat down opposite her and said with a smile, "What do you want to talk to me about?" Now that Suede is on the right track, the profits for the past 2 months have been calculated. 1/10 of it is your dividend. I've already exchanged it for banknotes from Buffett Bank and brought it to you. It's a total of 530,000 copper coins. Gloria took out 2 banknotes from her small bag and placed them on the table. She smiled and said, "Previously, I promised to give 1/10 of Suede's profits to Miss Luna's foundation to help the children. However, I'm not very familiar with Miss Luna. I wonder if Mr. Meg can help me give this money to her. The weather is cold in the winter. Suede prepared a batch of winter clothes for the children. I hope Miss Luna can help distribute it." You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.